Am I supposed to put up dad jokes now? Good evening, everyone. I am calling our meeting to order at 6 p.m. This is the June 3rd Committee of the Whole meeting, and we've officially called this meeting to order. Just before we begin, I did want to just recognize that my son Ryder decided he wanted to attend a Committee of the Whole meeting, and so he's in the gallery, and so in the efforts of building up youth interest in local government, he's here for the whole duration. So moving on with embarrassing my son, we will now move on to the adoption of the agenda. I'd like to ask for a motion to accept the agenda as presented. Councillor Reid.
Yeah, I was going to suggest that we table item 5C. Given that Councillor Wilson was the one who originally raised this, I think it would be wise, given that there's nothing urgent about this issue, to table it until he returns. So I would suggest that a modified agenda be approved with the elimination of 5C.
Any comments or questions on that from my colleagues? Seeing that around the bench, then I will call for the adoption of the agenda as amended. All in favor? That's passed unanimously. Excellent, I did vote. Moving on to the adoption of the previous minutes. Adoption of the minutes, looking for a motion to accept the minutes of May 21st, Committee of the Whole. Councillor Flowers.
I will move to accept the minutes of May 21st from the COW meeting.
All in favor? That's passed unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay, moving speedily along to delegations. Item 4A, we'd like to first call up the Cochrane Society for Housing Options, calling up Mr. Kevin McDonald, the Executive Director. Welcome, Kevin.
Good evening. Sorry, good evening, everybody. So, my name is Kevin McDonald. I am the Executive Director of Cochrane Society for Housing Options, and tonight I am here to present Progressing Affordable Housing in Cochrane Together. So, a brief outline of what my presentation will entail tonight. Topic number 1 is, who is CSHO? Topic number 2 is affordable housing, where we are today. And topic number 3 is our partnership, creating and building the foundation to build upon. So, who is Cochrane Society for Housing Options? CSHO provides our community with the opportunity to thrive. We provide the most vulnerable Cochranites with a sense of hope, dignity, safety, and security, and we achieve this by offering good, clean, affordable places to call home. CSHO believes that every day should start and end at home. Why CSHO? Because I'm 70 years old and I've been working in town full-time. As a result of my age, I've had to reduce my hours to part-time. I can no longer afford my market rent. I need affordable housing in Cochrane in order to remain working part-time. The graph on the right is a snapshot that I was able to capture through rentfaster.ca, and it specifically captures the difference in market rent between April 29th, 2024 and April 29th, 2023. As you can see, there's a marked approximate $300 increase in market rent around town. Rents are going up and they're going up quickly. Why CSHO? Because I work full-time as a cook in a restaurant in town and earn under $30,000 per year. I can't afford market housing on my monthly salary. The result of earning minimum wage in Alberta means that a full-time worker can gross $2,270 per month. While I was on RentFaster pulling the statistics in the table in the previous slide, I also came across all of the active listings. Contained within the active listings at the beginning of May 2024 were 3 rooms offered in houses throughout Cochrane. Each one of those rooms came with a monthly price tag of $1,000 per month. What does this mean? This means that for somebody who is earning minimum wage, earning $2,270 gross before any source deductions, they would be required to spend 44% of their income right off the top on rent, which would mean they would be left with $1,270 a month for all other living expenses. Why CSHO? Because we earn under $30,000 a year and we only receive our pensions and don't have any other finances to use. Going back to that room for rent, The average pensioner or person who is collecting some sort of government assistance and benefits earns roughly $1,700 a month. Renting that room again for $1,000 a month means that that person is spending 59% of their gross income on rent before all other household expenses. What this means is that they're left with $700 in their pocket to make it from the 1st to the 30th or the 31st of the month, and that is it. So, affordable housing. Where are we today? As of today, there are 57 affordable housing units in town. Based on the total dwelling count within the town, this equates to 0.41% of total dwellings. To address the core housing need of 10%, we would need to construct an additional 1,325 units. What we need to do is boost the supply of affordable housing in Cochrane. We need to improve collaboration on tackling the housing crisis, as well as generating a stable pipeline of community housing projects as we move forward. 3, our partnership, creating the foundation to build upon. CSHO delivered a presentation to the Committee of the Whole on September 18th, 2023, where we gave an affordable housing brief. At that time, we committed to returning and making a formal request for land. Since then, CSHO has been diligently working to determine what the most desirable characteristics of a new affordable housing development should have and should contain. So, the first part is the physical land and characteristics. In order to get economies of scale and maximize our build and footprint, we would like to achieve a target of 60 units within our next build. What that means is that we will require a plot of land that is greater than 2 acres. We would also like to obtain some land that is municipally, provincially, or federally owned. While we were doing our research and due diligence, we did have the opportunity to hop on MLS and look at what was available in the private market. In order to hit that 2-acre target that I spoke about a little bit earlier, we would need to be spending at least $1 million up to $2.5 million for that 2-acre plot of land. Unfortunately, because land and vacant land cannot be mortgaged, it would need to be outright purchased. So we would be looking at acquiring land that is either municipally, provincially, or federally owned. Contains a slope of less than 15 degrees. While I love this town and the topography, we can't live in the foothills of the Rockies without hills. Unfortunately, that narrows the scope a little bit further as we are looking for land that has a 15-degree or less slope currently. The reason behind this is that anything greater than a 15-degree slope would require some substantive remediation before it's ready to start building on. Vacant land is the next one. We wish to acquire land that doesn't have any existing utility corridors, pathways, schools, parks, or any other sort of municipal services already attached to that land. Once evaluating the physical characteristics of the land, we go into the second set of data that's incredibly important, and that's suitability for its intended use. We need to have land that is centrally located and contains a good walkability or bikeability score. The reality of it is over 50% of our tenants do not own vehicles. We need to have land that is centrally located and that is in close proximity to employment opportunities, to food, groceries, retail, and commercial activities within town, as well as the community supports that many of our tenants access frequently or from time to time. We also need the land to be ready and have a positive community sentiment attached to our build. In order for us to have a shovel-ready project in hand when the next round of federal or provincial funding is released, we need to acquire a piece of land that is vacant and ready to start construction immediately. In addition to this, CSHO is also a good neighbor, and our goal is to seamlessly fold into the community in which we will be located. Our goal is to have the community where we will call our new home, welcome us with open arms, and be as excited about us coming into it as we are about going into the new neighborhood. And the last is existing utilities. Much like the readiness criteria, in order for us to be in a position to be build ready and quickly capture any sort of funding that is released both federally or provincially, we need to ensure that the next parcel of land that we use to develop has all existing city infrastructure already in place. So freshwater, wastewater, gas, electricity, fiber, internet services, etc. Because having all of these services already at site will help to reduce our construction costs, thereby lowering the total cost of the project. Our ideal next steps. As we are coming here today to council to request land for the next affordable housing build, our ideal next step would be by the end of Q3 of 2024, council, administration, and CSHO collaboratively work together to select an appropriate plot of land for our partnership's next affordable housing development. We would like this to be done ideally by the end of September so that we can then go back, conduct all of the preliminary development work, and have a shovel-ready project by the end of Q1 2025 so that as the next round of federal or provincial funding is released, we will be in a perfect position to apply and make full use of whatever grants are out there and available to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. McDonald, for your excellent and very timely presentation. I know we give you 10 minutes. I think you clocked in at 8. So well done. And I think this is, your second presentation this year, perhaps, or within the last 12 months. And housing is something that's a growing concern and awareness for our council. So I am going to turn it over to my colleagues to ask, I'm sure, a very, very large number of questions. Councillor Reid, over to you.
Thank you for your presentation. Remind me, Kevin, when was the last time you were before council? How long ago was that?
September the 18th.
September the 8th of this year?
2023, yes.
Okay, I was going to say. I'm kind of surprised at the ambitious timelines you're putting us under, because I kind of understood from the last presentation in September that you'll be coming back soon, and it seems to have been quite a while. I'm just wondering why there was the delay.
That's an excellent question. In order for us to come back and make a formal request for land, we wanted to make sure that we had done our due diligence, and we wanted to make sure that we knew roughly what we were going to be asking for, which is why I was referencing our ideal characteristics in a plot of land.
And that's a good segue into my next question. The ideal characteristics, are those the ones that you came up with, or are they required as part of any federal or provincial grant?
They're ones that we came up with in order to hit our target of 60 units for the next build.
So I'm referring to the criteria on page 2. That long list actually is what you had identified as characteristics. So those aren't necessarily characteristics that would be required for funding, but required, or what you require in terms of the go forward.
That's correct. Those characteristics are not tied to any current funding agreements in place or any of the grants that are going to be launched through the province and or the feds.
Okay. And the third question I had, if I could, was if this moves forward, well, that's not a question, I guess, if it's more of a question in my mind, at least as to when. Would you look at a build form where there might be a partnership with a developer, so there might be commercial on the bottom with residential above? Is that something that your society might consider?
That's a wonderful question. My answer, and I can only speak for myself in giving this, is that at this point in time, absolutely nothing is off the table. Right now, we need to secure land. Once we have secured the land, we can then start engaging in the pre-development process, and through block design, we can kind of determine what the ideal composition of the building would look like. Me personally, when it comes to building affordable housing, I like to see it more as building community, and I would love to have a building that brings the community in as well as housing the community as well. So yes, looking to partner and possibly having some commercial space on the ground floor is definitely something that we would be interested in investigating as we move forward.
Okay. So again, just to summarize, the delay in terms of your last presentation, this presentation, is because you were doing your due diligence. The criteria is not necessarily required for a federal provincial level, but what you believe your society would require in terms of being able to move it forward. And you would consider, and I believe there are potentially partners out there, developers who would they may be able to get federal or provincial grants that you may not be able to access in terms of the development if you were to consider commercial on the ground floor and residential above. So thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, Councillor Reid. Councillor Flowers, over to you.
Hello, thank you for your presentation. I agree, we need to be ready so that when the funding comes down, we can be first in line to get our hands on it. And that we need to partner because it's very complicated and difficult. You're in one of the hardest industries to make a difference in, so we need to work together. The 57 units that you said are in Cochrane, that includes the seniors at the Evergreen Manor?
That is correct. The numbers that I used were the ones that were most readily available to me, which included CSHO's portfolio, as well as the independent living program through Rocky View Foundation, which is Evergreen Manor.
So the true ones for families that are available, how many units does CSHO have?
At this time, 35.
35. So we've proven the need in the community, and it's just growing and growing, so I am anxious to get at this. Thank you for maintaining all the ones that we have so far, because I know that's a big job as well. CSHO often has startup funding too. If we can identify a piece of land, there might be a chance to either borrow or get a forgivable loan, which would be most helpful to get started. We know that adequate housing relieves stress and promotes good mental health for people in the community, so I do think the town should work together with you and get this going. I'd like to see administration come up with a list of housing that would be fitting the needs that you're talking about, accessible, and having utilities available so that we can get on it. So thank you very much for your presentation and all the best.
Thank you, Councillor Flowers. Mayor Janang.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate you being here tonight. And I just want to begin by thanking you and your board for specifically the volunteers that come together every month and work on this on behalf of our community. You in your paid position, but I do appreciate the work that you're doing and the board's work to fill this gap in our community. So first off, thank you. Second, I understand that we have an outstanding partnership agreement with CSHO, and I also understand that that's being addressed. And I've heard loud and clear from your new board chair and from your previous board chair and your board that you would prefer that that is a collaborative effort, not something that the town admin develops and then comes back, and this is more of a statement than a question, comes back to you with a draft. And I share that. I think this needs to be a collaborative effort, and you rebuild and modernize that partnership agreement together. And I think that's the beginning of the together that you're saying and delivering in your report tonight. And that's the one word, and Councillor Flowers touched on it as well, that the theme that I see interwoven throughout the package that was provided to council, your words tonight. This is not something I think the CSHO can take on by yourselves. I think that you would if you had to, but I just want to instill in you that this needs to be a partnership and a collaborative effort from us, CSHO, all of the people that need to be a part of this to get this over the finish line. So I just want to really emphasize that you're not alone in this, and that the board, while you're doing the heavy lifting, you have a lot of support, and don't be afraid to ask. So the first ask is here tonight for land. I really like that you're here at the table. Councillor Reid, I think, was referencing that, I hope not criticizing, but really just emphasizing that we realize the need and we want to be part of the solution. So that's the urgency I think you're feeling from us. So I agree that it's together. So I think you're here asking the appropriate questions of us tonight. Number 4 on my list, sorry, 5 I think I'm at now. Can you explain the process in which you guys envision, so we come back with, say, an identified parcel of land, 2+ acres, and checks the boxes that you've appropriately asked us to look at, then what? And to get to the shovel ready, readiness, is it, and I have an idea in my own mind about a concept, a set of drawings. Whenever you apply, there's a criteria and you want to have that kind of on the shelf and ready to go. But how do we get to there? Is it you guys go away? And this is where I think we need to work collaboratively, because and I'll let you finish or say something here in a minute, but I'm getting, my point is, we have many needs in our community. This is one of them. The potential for Cochrane to provide other needs at the same time, maybe through a mixed use type of development. Affordable housing obviously is the predominant reason that we're looking and why you're here, but maybe there is a commercial portion of it, or maybe there is a market value portion of this. Like, have you guys given that much thought? But I think together we can get there faster than if you go off into your own little silo. I'll stop there.
All right, I don't know, is there a question?
Yeah, that was a question.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, I can ask it again about.
No, it's okay.
How do you see the process going from we've identified land to a set of drawings? I think we need to be involved, but.
Wonderful. And I guess, first off, thank you. And thank you on behalf of the board as well. Very much appreciate your compliments. And so, both fortunately and unfortunately, the way I'm envisioning this as we move forward is that identifying and earmarking land for development is going to be the easiest part in this entire process. Then comes a far more difficult part. But as you said as well, Mayor Janung, collaboration is going to be key as we move forward. And that is one of the dynamics I hope that CSHO will be able to bring to the table. Together, we are the power of myself and the board of directors, but if we involve a whole lot more people from the town, as well as with council, we're that much more strong. And so to answer your question as to the mixed use in the commercial space, I think that that's when, I guess, for lack of a better, the magic starts happening through the design charrettes, when we start taking a look at the actual footprint of the space and we actually start mapping out what is possible in the confines of the parcel of land that we've been given. As far as what the actual next steps are, that is something that the board and I are going to have to take back and evaluate as to whether we go the consultant route, whether we go and find somebody directly within an architectural firm who can actually help us start mapping things out and getting us from a vacant parcel to an end division product that's, I guess, a funding proposal and build ready, has yet to remain seen. Those are details that we will need to work out, and the board and I are actively talking about and engaging in as we speak right now. But right now, until we have a plot of land, there's no kind of moving forward. This is our full stop until we can start on with the next phase. So I can pledge to you that we will be collaborative in our approach, and there is nothing that I like doing more than a blue sky kind of design charrette where we take a look at all of the need in the community and try to best match that with the plot of land, ensuring that we get enough affordable housing units on the top with our rent roll to maintain our financial viability as we move forward, and looking at what other cool kind of dynamics we can throw into the building to start pulling members of the community into the building as well.
Yeah, I appreciate your answer, and I hope it hasn't come across my line of questioning that there's some sort of form of control that I'm suggesting from the town. I'm only suggesting that if we were to go through this design phase together, that I think we could get through some barriers and some hurdles faster than if you were to come back repeatedly and asking for things. So that's really all I was suggesting. So I'm hearing from you that that's to be determined. Step number one, give us some land so that we can actually put a design together regardless of what's on.
Yes, that's correct. The way I see the next phase of the process is going to be, honestly, a good old-fashioned barn raising event where we need the community to come together and work with us and help us design our next build.
Nice. Last question. What is the funding situation to get from, so we say we come tomorrow morning, and I'm tongue in cheek, we come back tomorrow morning with here's your 2 acres, and what's the funding situation of being able to afford to get to that shovel readiness by Q1 next year? Do you have to go fundraise? Do you have the money in the bank? Is there assistance required?
Thank you, and that's another very, very good question. So throughout the course of the 2022 and 2023 operating year, with express consent through the province, we have been able to sell a few of our independent condominium units at the Trading Post Ridge, which we have since properly invested and are planning on using as build financing to help us get to the, I guess, drawings in hand, funding proposal ready stage. However, when it comes to applying for greater funding and financing for the actual build, there are certain debt to equity ratios and other complicating factors that need to be taken into account. CSHO has privately raised some funds to help offset the costs of the initial development experience and process that we're going to have to undergo. But ultimately, we are going to have to see as I guess, quotations come in. And again, we will also leave no stone unturned. If there are funding and grant opportunities out there to help us get in that funding ready, or I guess shovel ready position, we will be taking advantage of every dollar that's out there in the community that goes towards the creation of affordable housing as we go along this process.
So what I'm hearing is you're sufficiently funded to get to through the design phase.
I'm very hopeful and optimistic that that is the case, yes.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Again, appreciate your patience with my questions and ranting.
All right, thank you, Mayor Janan. Councillor Fideko, over to you, please.
Thank you for the presentation. Have you identified some parcels of land that you think that would particularly work at this point, considering that you do have kind of a tight timeline? Have you already identified what those parcels could be?
Very loosely speaking, I believe that there are upwards of maybe a half a dozen properties that would tick 90% of the boxes so far. But the ultimate truth at this point in time is that the most ideal plot of land that I can see CSHO obtaining would be one that we collaboratively decide with council and administration, where the partnership between the three of us can kind of happily settle on a single piece.
And with, I mean, obviously affordable housing, that the whole portfolio is quite, talked about all across the country. What kind of timelines do other communities have? Like, have they kind of had this short type of timeline to get a project ready? Or are you starting to see that trend kind of move that way, especially with the availability of funds that the government's handing out?
I believe so, but the honest truth is, without actually researching it thoroughly, I would feel unprepared to address that right now. I'm going to make a note of that, and I promise you that I will send you an email with a thorough answer as we move forward.
Okay, perfect. I agree with everybody around the table that the project needs to get going, and I think that rather than spinning it around and having it come back for another presentation, pretty soon we're 6 months, then we're a year. I think that if we're going to speak about getting affordable housing done, then we need to start moving and not just talking about moving. We need to actually commit, and then we can all go forward. But your board's doing some tremendous work. You have you always have great stats of what is exactly going on, and I think it definitely has brought new light to all of us sitting probably around this table about what affordable housing really looks like here in our town. So thank you, and yeah, absolutely, I would suggest coming back sooner than later, and let's get going.
Thank you.
All right, Councillor Reid.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up where Councillor Fideko left off, and that actually stems back to my initial question, and that was, I was so impressed with your presentation last September, and I think we all were. I can't speak for all of us, but I'm fairly confident that in saying that. And I guess the concern for me was a 10-month delay to do due diligence is just too long, I think, in terms of this collective shared vision of where we want to go. And so I'm hoping that the town partnership with the society will help address that so that, as Councillor Fideko has said, let's get on with this, right? And the other thing I wanted to say was a year ago, the mayor, Drew Heinman, myself, and Councillor Wilson happened to be in Toronto for a conference, and we saw an affordable housing project that was put up in a matter of months. Now, it doesn't sound very glamorous that it was actually used shipping containers, but actually it was a spectacular building. Admittedly, if I remember, some of the neighbors weren't really crazy about it going up in their neighborhood, but that aside, I think it was put up, and Drew can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was put up like in 3 months, and it was really impressive. It probably had the number of units that you're talking about. And it really, it looked, for me, it looked like a compliment of the community. And again, and it was an area of Toronto where there was public access, there was a park on the south side of it. It was really an example of something that could happen quickly. Again, I have no idea what the costs are associated with, but we understood from the individual who was touring us from the planning department of Toronto that the city supported that, right, and was able to work towards that end. And so I think there are a number of solutions that can come together to move this along a little quicker, and I think perhaps the partnership that the mayor was referring to is exactly what we need. So thank you.
Excellent. I just wanted to perhaps share a point for clarification before we move on to Councillor Flowers' questions. It is my understanding that the organization, CHO, has been working on their presentation for some time, and some of the delay in their presentation is more on the municipal side of not being able to fit them into our agendas, rather than on the volunteer organization's capacity. So I just want to provide some clarity there. I know they've been working diligently, and that Mr. McDonald is one staff member, and they've got a new volunteer board. So I think I'm quite proud of the work that they've done for a group of volunteers in a one-man band. But I just want to provide that clarity before we move on to the next set of questions. So, Councillor Flowers, over to you.
More points to add. I wanted to say congratulations on Home Reno Heaven and how you've kept it going, and I know it supports the affordable housing program in the community, so it's been a real success story. We did tour the containers a few years ago. There was pros and cons to them, I remember, and it is worth looking at, but everything's complicated. The $150,000 that we put aside this year for affordable housing, we haven't heard any more about that, so perhaps when we do get a report on the locations, we can hear more about what we're going to do to use that to support affordable housing. And I was involved when the Housing Society built the Homestead apartment building. It was an exciting project. So many community groups wanted to help, and Activettes paid for, I think, the washer and dryers, and Home Treasures paid for the balconies or something. It was really a community effort. So I think getting the land might not be the easiest thing, but once we do it, the fun part begins, where we can get people involved and make it fill the needs in the community and get it going. So I'm excited about that.
Excellent. Yes, Mr. McDonald. Sorry, did you? Yeah, you're good? Excellent. Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation. I think perhaps what you're hearing from our bench is that we're very supportive and understanding of the need. But for my own clarification, you'd identified that we're looking at just over 1,300 core housing needs at the current population with our municipality, and your organization, the CHO, provides 35 units. So a small step. So then your vision, what you're saying is, we already have a partnership between CHO and the municipality. We want to continue in that piece, the big piece though, before you can go ahead and apply for grants, do any design work, start working on partnerships. Any of those pieces is we do need to identify some lands, and you've provided some criteria around that. So my question then is, I guess if we can come up with that, how many units are you looking to provide in this first build?
Okay, so the first build will be, I guess to go back to physics, will be to get the
Right,
ball
based on
rolling
what
down
would be
the
your
hill.
goal, yeah.
And so our goal will be, with the new build, 60 units.
Okay,
So basically triple the size of the existing portfolio.
okay, 60 units, and, okay, excellent. So, yeah, and then a big piece of it really just hinges on all of our partners to start getting on the same page at the same time. So I think I have more of a question for administration. I think council has indicated both from the last presentation and from today's that we have a sincere interest in making this a priority of council's. And of course, in tonight's meeting, we can't give any direction. What is the next step the council would have to do to bump this up as a priority?
Through the chair, I would suggest that recognizing the need in the community and obviously understanding the general sentiment of council this evening, administration would look to bring a report back to council in the near future to identify potential opportunities for locations.
Okay, so would we need to do like a notice of motion or anything, or is it kind of clear direction that the council's looking for some kind of more detailed action plans?
We understand the direction coming from council with respect to bringing back more information on this matter.
Excellent, thank you. Councillor Federico, over to you.
One more quick question. Councillor Flowers brought up a point about the $150,000, and I believe that included some sort of staffing, did it not? Has that person been hired?
I would have to look into that, as community services is not in my portfolio anymore, but that is something that we can reflect upon in any future report coming back to council.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, Mr. McDonald, it looks like you've answered all the questions that the council bench has for you this evening. So I wanted to thank you and your board and everyone involved in stepping up and providing such a vital need, and look forward to partnering with you and the group through the next part of our housing chapter. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Excellent. All right, so moving on from Delegation 4A, we're looking to move to item 4B. And so this is Alberta Health Services. We are now calling up Mr. Tony Pasek, the Associate ED, Mr. Doug Odney, the Zone Director, Tyler Farkas, Zone Director, and Carol Parody, the Senior Advisor, to present on Alberta Health Services tonight. So, welcome to our chambers.
Thank you. Doug and Tyler are there. I know I have 10 minutes, so this is a standard presentation, so some of the slides are sort of structure and that piece, and we'll get to sort of the meat of the presentation, sort of what's important to you guys, and obviously open it up for questions. Ultimately, we're going to highlight today our HS priorities around improving EMS response times, give a bit of an update provincially, an update around the performance in Cochrane specifically, a bit of an update on the provincial initiatives that we're going, and then open it up to any questions. These are the same 4 slides. I think I was here just over a year ago of our priorities, and they really haven't changed. Reducing EMS response times, decreasing ED wait times, improving patient flow through the healthcare, and reducing surgical wait. So obviously I'm here about EMS response times. A little bit of a change. Tyler is here. He's covering off Lauren Calder, who is in the South Zone currently and joining us in that, and Doug Odney as well as the director in actually this area out here. Actually, Tyler is. The rest of it hasn't changed in a sense of our leadership team across the zone. Nothing here around just the slides, and you guys know your area, and we'll chat more about that. Resources in Cochrane, just as a reminder, sort of 2 24-hour trucks, a Monday to Friday 8-hour truck, piggybacked with another 8-hour rotation on top of that for sort of IFT. When we started, we used the baseline of November 2022, and that was one of our times obviously coming out of COVID, our highest sort of strain time. Also when the government announced sort of the health action plan and to sort of move some initiatives forward. So the status of March of 2024, metro urban, communities greater than 3,000, and rural and remote. Cochrane sits in the communities greater than 3,000. Those categories were designed by Alberta Health in the sense of response times associated to those. So we'll just kind of cover, and I'll cover a couple key points. Delta Echo, we have seen some improvements since our 45-minute offload work and return to service work, improving sort of response times to Delta Echo, Bravo to Charlie, Delta Echo, and then sort of Alpha, which sort of includes sort of all calls. I think what's important to look at some of that, obviously in the metro world, we've seen some bigger improvements in communities greater than 3,000, still some improvements and some targets, pieces to go. What's important when I look at the metro environment is an overall strain of the system, and the reason I bring it up for Cochrane is obviously the strain that Calgary can put on the surrounding areas. And we look at Alpha responses being 1 hour and 54 minutes, and being able to get that down to 29 minutes gets a better overall view of how the system is performing, and sort of less strain on sort of some of the rural crews coming into Calgary. Code reds and red alerts, as they're counted, since we launched the 45-minute offload and return to service work, we have gotten that down significantly in Calgary. The red alerts are only measured in Calgary and in Edmonton, and we've seen that number obviously drastically reduce. We still get a few, and then obviously some peak times those can happen for sure, but the numbers and the duration are a lot less for us currently. Responses into Calgary. This is just sort of giving a 12-week snapshot. We've seen that drastically reduce in the number of times that units are responding into Calgary from suburban rural. So if you look at last week as an example, that number would be about sort of 12 or 15. And in the sort of 2022 and the highest it was, that number would be like 270. So we are seeing a significant less pull of our resources into Calgary. It doesn't mean it doesn't ever happen, but that number is a lot less for us. We don't really ever sort of see that number being zero. Our goal of sort of the closest unit responding to an echo response, we will send that closest crew despite where they're from. But obviously sending a transport truck to transport and get that crew back. So we are seeing that less. We have had some sort of peaks and bounds of a bad day where that happens a few times and then sort of not happen for a couple days, but it has improved for us significantly. Response times, this is more of a provincial stat. This is just the line graphs of the charts, so I won't sort of go into that. You guys can look at those as you see. And then we'll just back up. Response times for events in Cochrane. So we have seen that number come down. What you see for me when I see this, and if you actually look from about June to March of 2024, and so you sort of see, March of 2023 is when we launched the 45-minute offload, and we sort of see that number drop below 14. We had some initial really good success. We had some that sort of creep back up, sort of got better and worse, and sort of some larger variation as we launched that project and initiative. When we sort of get to July and August, what we started to see a little bit was some staffing challenges, some bed closures, those kind of things. Flow through the hospital was a bit more of a challenge, and we saw those numbers start to peak up throughout the late summer and into the fall. And when you look at the fall, that's where we started having more respiratory outbreaks and closures and some challenges with flow there. That got a bit better for us as we hit November, December. And then in January, around Christmas time, and 3 weeks over that period of time, we had some significant staffing challenges, and that impacts flow for us. And when I say staffing, both in EMS and in our health world. And then we've seen sort of throughout the new year, those numbers start to come back down. In all honesty, that's to March. April was pretty good. May was a bit challenging for us. When we chat with our crews there, sort of seeing where they see, and we've seen May be a bit more of a challenging time. Still not back to 2022, but we've had a few challenges in the last few weeks for sure. Event volume from 2022, 23 to 2023, 24, fairly neutral in that sense overall of our fiscal year. Here's sort of our response times, and we go from fiscal year to calendar year here a bit, 2020 through to 2024. So obviously the 90th percentile in number of events year to date is January, February, March. We did see the numbers come back with our return to service and help our response times here in Cochrane, having a unit here more often. We're still not where we need to be, but it has improved for us over the last year. Where are Cochrane units responding? So in here, we do have the activity and the numbers. The pie graph really shows, how often they're available, how often they're on event, how much percentage of time when they're logged in they're moving, and how much percent of time they are out of service, and obviously where the transport destinations are. And then EMS ambulances that are serving in Cochrane. So we have seen, the number, if you look at 2022 to 2023, we have seen the number go, from 62% to 73%, which ultimately is represented that Cochrane is here a little bit more often. Still Calgary coming out here by nature of doing some IFTs and doing some other work in that sense. And also we've seen like Airdrie have to come out less, Nakota and sort of other, and those ones drop a little bit in that sense. So not impactful as much as the community surrounding, which means they're in their communities more often as well. A little bit more detail on where the Cochrane units are going. So for me, when I look at this, we highlight two main things. The Cochrane units are, for the previous year was 39% in Cochrane. We're now at 56%. Rocky View County is sort of next, when we respond outside. But the other piece is we have also went from 28% where it's serving in Calgary, sort of down to 12%. So that number is coming down and heading in a downward direction for us there. We'll talk a little bit about provincial initiatives. but I want to talk probably specifically to the ones that you guys might be interested into that impact us here. This is just a reminder of where all our inputs came from our initiatives, meaning the APEC committee, the EMS dispatch review, HQCA, review of the event in Calgary, our EMS service plan, and our culture assessment. It led to about 110 initiatives. 20 of those, Alberta Health has taken sort of responsibility of 20 of those initiatives. That left us with approximately 90. 47 of them are complete. 43 of them will roll over from our operating plan this year into, well, last year into this year, which obviously we're a couple months into. I'll touch on 2 of the IFT and our 45-minute offload. So our 45-minute return to service is obviously still our #1 initiative. There's a mandate from the health minister to get that to 45 minutes. That number right now in April was about 1.4 hours at our regional major hospitals in Calgary. We don't really, in the sense of that reporting number, include how long it takes us to get out of Cochrane urgent care or urgent care. I do have those numbers in that sense, but we measure sort of our largest hospitals and the children's in the sense of the data that gets reported there. We did, like I say, see that increase in May. I haven't seen May's data get summarized for me yet here in June. We do know it's going to be worse than 1.4. It was a challenging month for us, and it seems to have improved a bit in the last week. We're still not at 45 minutes, and it's like, well, what is it going to get us to get there? It's a bit of a challenge for us on a couple of things. We know that responding to major traumas, cardiac arrest, those kind of things, by the time we clean up our truck, get our paperwork, do a safe handoff, those kind of things, those ones may take us longer than an hour. The sort of more, it's going to sound bad, a routine call, we know we can get sort of those ones done within that. What we're trying to understand is, and in our process is, if we're cleared up and we've handed over our patient to the hospital, but it's just charting, or it's a big event where our staff actually need a timeout and a cool down, we use more of out of service codes to sort of track that, because it's not really an offload issue at the hospital, those kind of things. And so we're really trying to be consistent on how we measure that so that we can understand, is it just charting, is it cleaning, is it cool down because of a serious event to give them some time and some rest from a staff. And so that's how we're looking to sort of help understand how we can impact that from an EMS, and obviously sort of matching up how our hospitals are making out for those times. Interfacility transfers. So this week we went live with our dedicated contract units in Calgary with a few of the resources that are on. They are putting on a total of 19 resources, 9 Class 2 ambulances and 10 NET, which are Class 4 ambulances. 3 of those went live, well, started on the weekend, but this week. So they're up and running with those. We anticipate the rest of those to come on board throughout the summer up until September 1st is what they are telling us right now. As much as that sort of the pre-scheduled, non-urgent ones within sort of that 50 kilometers, and how does that help us out in Cochrane? Really looking to give us capacity back in Calgary. We're not eliminating any of our units in Calgary in that sense. So as we have hopefully some gains back into the system in that adding of those resources, is looking at sort of our deployment plan. So if it's a non-urgent transfer out of Cochrane, can that Calgary truck now come out and get that patient and bring it back? And we did the Cochrane truck in Cochrane. Are things that we have to look at, see what capacity they add back to us. I chatted with a few of the staff Friday, actually from Cochrane, and we stopped in the station there earlier today. One of the other pieces is, we have a dedicated IFT truck. Can we actually, for lack of a better word, make it just, a truck is a truck is a truck? Can we add the 8 hours in throughout the night? Because with that, we could add some depth to sort of response in Cochrane in that sense by being able to utilize that resource. Outside of the dedicated IFT, I'm not saying unscheduled urgent transfers, our Cochrane crews still do them. They would still do that, try not to trip, but being able to potentially look at those kind of things to add some ability to utilize that resource and keep it in Cochrane more often in that sense. One of the challenges we have is really around physical vehicles, capital dollars, and space. So we've been looking as we gain capacity and looking at scenarios in some of our challenging areas of where we need to add resources. Is if we had an ambulance, do we actually have a place to park it? Do we actually have the staff to fill the positions, those kind of pieces? And so we're currently in our planning stages of looking at what can we do in the current fiscal year. In all honesty, we have no new dollars this fiscal year. We're 2 months in. What we are doing is our 5-year planning. So year 1 being next fiscal year to year 5. And we are looking at what options we can do within this fiscal year as we see capacity with the contractor coming in. But also, recommendations are we making in business case we're making to get the capital for space and vehicles for next fiscal year and the 5 years beyond. Our folks have done the modeling, the growth projections in those pieces, and we know we need to add in Cochrane and in that area, and it's just a matter of getting the funding, putting the business case forward, and getting that answer on those pieces. Other pieces really around workforce strategies and recruitment strategies. So we've got a national campaign. We have some internal processes within HSAA and our own organization about how we move patients. We're trying to work on those pieces. We're struggling around moving internal people we already have, and we're delaying getting new recruits into the system by some of our processes that is not filling sort of permanent vacancies. So we continue to work hard at that part of it, working with our partners in the union to clarify sort of those pieces and how we bring new people in versus sort of using the process to get different schedules or different units or those kind of pieces. And so we think we have some strategies in force there going forward and hopefully make out some headway there. Recruitment, retention. Obviously, there's just some links in the presentation to some of the national campaigns. We have seen probably over 300 sort of responses, specifically in the Calgary zone, of people that are from out of province or that piece looking to be sort of ready to come and work. What ready to work is a bit of a definition of getting registered at the Alberta College of Paramedics if they're coming from out of province or out of country and some of those pieces. And we have worked with our college. We know those processes to help those people through that process. But we have seen some success of starting to bring some of those folks in. 811 and shared response. And so obviously if a caller is sort of low acuity and trying to move it over to 811 to nursing resources, you know, we've seen some success there, and every time we don't have a send ambulance is important. Not as much as we'd hoped out of that. There is still a number of calls that come back to us. We are working on ways that we might be able to, you know, send a different resource. A lot of times it comes back because they still think they might need an assessment and a physical assessment, and then looking at different types of resources like that we could send a PRU or a community paramedic versus sending an ambulance to kind of do that assessment. And if it's urgent, obviously call a transport truck, and if it's not, getting them the right resources that they might need. And so those are works in progress for us on that initiative. The return to service, there isn't one initiative that's more important than getting our ambulances out of the hospitals and back, and that remains our #1 priority. And I think I touched on the dedicated IFT. MFR, this was a good news, bad news story. To a certain extent, we did have some funding, $3.85 million. It got sort of broken up in two groups from some of our smaller departments where we can assist with some equipment and training. Some of the larger departments want a per event volume. It nowhere represents what it costs municipalities to respond in MFR. I recognize that, but it was what we had at the time, and we continue to sort of have some meetings to try to help really articulate the value that those groups add to our system and how to support them better. And that's honestly the presentation, and then I open it up for questions for sure.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for your presentation. Looks like we're ready to go with a few questions already. So Councillor Reid, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. I sincerely appreciate the update. And I sincerely appreciate the presentation that you gave at the last council meeting. I recognize that you're communicating the province's message as it relates to Alberta Health Services, EMS services, and I appreciate that. You know, for the last presentation and probably for the last 7 years, I've been concerned about how much the province, through Alberta Health Services, have offloaded the EMS services onto the backs of the taxpayers of Cochrane through their municipal taxes and in support of our fire services. I'm just wondering, do you know qualitatively how much our fire services are backfilling or supplementing the Alberta Health Services EMS program in Cochrane?
Qualitatively or quantitatively? Sorry.
Either way.
Like as I mentioned in sort of the MFR piece, right? I mean, we are now, like our modeling tools now allow us to actually look at what resources are doing in community, how often they're there, how often they're covered, if they're not there, what they're doing. So we have a lot more information that way to help us. And that's more to the protective services world versus sort of what they're doing on response, where they're responding and actually responding more in the EMS world. So we have both of those sort of data points available to us when we look at our modeling. What I can say is I do need to add a peak truck in Cochrane sooner than later. which would then tell me that our goal in the sense of the modeling is not to create a model that's sort of dependent on MFR. We want MFR to augment our system, not be the system, and be there for us. And I recognize where we're short resources, it absolutely has the feeling that they're covering for us. And our goal is to actually put our business cases forward to government that says, here's our response times, here's what you can expect, here's the resources we need. And that's the funding we need to move forward, and that's sort of where we're at with our planning in that piece with Alberta Health in that sense. It doesn't really answer the question. I don't really, how much you spend, what that looks like. In that sense, I wouldn't be able to answer that part of it from a fire department perspective.
Yeah, it might be useful in terms of a future presentation or an update. So that it's a good segue into the MFR program. So are we, I'm not sure I understand the program well enough to know, are we eligible for that, or are we getting some support from that in terms of being able to offset our costs?
I would have to check in with your fire chief on whether or not they got any funding in that year or not. It was quick, honestly. It became available in like February, March, and they turned around in some formulas in that to distribute it.
Through the chair, if I can assist, we can certainly bring back a report to council that would articulate what the data is. I know that our chiefs and our director of protective services do monitor that, as well as whether or not they were able to take advantage of the funding that was announced this year.
That would be great. I have one final question for you. Given my experience with community groups, and local citizen groups, they're a great resource. And in fact, I think the mayor has coined the term in some cases, we should get out of their way because they do a much better job at what they need to do than we do. But we have an active community group, and wondering what partnership or what availability have you made of yourself to that group in terms of being able to move this agenda forward for our community?
Yeah, my boss, Anne, is connected with that group, so she's taken on sort of that connection. I know that they've had some meetings. I'm not sure what they've had. Brian's here, so I mean, I don't know what they've met recently, but I honestly, if Brian wants to send me a note, I'm more than happy to share with them some of our planning tools, what we're looking to add, why we're looking to add, and when we're looking to add. We know sort of that information as part of our planning. My goal is you guys as council knows exactly what we're asking for, why we're asking for it, and then I can communicate two things is going to happen this year. Either we're going to get the funding or we're not. If we don't get the funding, you guys know exactly what we've asked for and can be able to advocate on that piece. Because sometimes your advocating helps me in that sense. But what my goal is making sure that you guys are advocating with all of the right information of what we put forward in a planning piece. I know in the past from in the HS world, we have not done a good job. We've been reactive in our planning or lack of planning, and actually having a 5-year plan and projections and knowing what we need in year 1, what we can project we need in year 4. So when we look at things like space needs, vehicle needs, people needs, we're trying to get out in front of that from in essence of a planning piece. And those are happy to share them with anybody who wants to know what they are.
Right. Yeah, I'm glad that you've mentioned it that way and put it in those terms. And again, I appreciate your frankness as you did in the presentation previously. Maybe again, in a future update, you could, as part of your presentation, indicate what that collaborative relationship looks like and how it's moving forward. I think that would be useful for our community, and I think useful for town council. So again, thank you for being here. I know that this can be a tough position, but I appreciate how frank you were last time and this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Reid. Mayor Genung, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Same comment. Appreciate you taking the time to be here and communicate all of the initiatives that AHS and EMS have taken and the steps in improving the service. So, and I want to say that first and then get into a little more of the harder questions. And again, as Councillor Reid indicated, I do appreciate your frankness and openness with us, and you're a messenger and you're working hard to try to make these improvements, and we get that. It's, I think we all want the same thing, so it's how can we get there together. My first question is around the red alerts and we've heard multiple times in our citizen action group, as Councillor Reid referenced, has been good at bringing and educating us as lay people on, what the echo codes mean, et cetera, et cetera. But red alerts essentially are when there's no ambulance in our community. Is that still happening in Cochrane?
So as I mentioned, we only measure red alerts in Calgary and in Edmonton. So for example, we don't measure red alerts in any regional centers or rural centers in that sense. So a red alert in Calgary, really we get to that when we have 3 or less units is what we would view sort of that red alert sort of piece. 4 to 7 is sort of orange, 7 to 13 yellow, and then we sort of get green above that. But.
So by not measured doesn't mean that there isn't any?
No, the one thing I do have in our modeling, and the problem with it is it's not a report, it's an interactive tool where I can actually plug in, and that's where, like I don't want to address that, but in essence, meet with your fire chief, if there's an emergency services council planning kind of piece, a place to sort of walk through our planning tools, what we're looking at, what we're looking to add. Information we do have now that we never had in previous years, right? Would I be like, where's my ambulance? Is it here, is it not here? And I'd have to look at it and say, my answer previously would be, well, if you look and say, well, our response times are X and the unit is in Cochrane 80% of the time, or 70% or 60% gives us a good idea of where that's at. What I actually have now is the ability to look at 100% of logged in hours to say, okay, Cochrane was here 66% of the time. When it wasn't here, where was it? What was it doing? But also I can actually show that like Airdrie might have been here 6%, and then you can put the percentages together and figure out how much the actual coverage is. We've never been able to sort of answer that question that says, well, what happens in that 30%? We kind of show that, here's the dispatch center, here's how we move the units, here's how we do that piece of it. But we can actually show what unit is in and if their coverage, if they're available on that piece. The challenge is it's an interactive tool in real time, and happy to demonstrate that, offer up anything to council to come to the dispatch center and look and see it happen in real time. That's an open invite for anybody who wants to come and see that part of it, of how that's looked at and managed. But
I appreciate the answer. Do you think it might help your case if AHS started to track that in rural communities or such as ours? I call us rural, right?
And that's what our system status management, Graham, he's able to now produce recommendations based on that activity and based on like population projections, ghost projections, which obviously he's the actuarist. He goes back 12 years, and our projections of growth and call volume are pretty accurate in that. He's been able to demonstrate that piece of it, and that's where we know where we're strained today and how short. Like there's areas that we need ambulances today, right? There's areas that we need them in 2 years, and in that part of our planning, we actually have sort of those pieces, and that's the part where I'm not quite at the stage where we've submitted the ask to my boss and to government that says this is what we need. But ultimately, I want to be able to work with you guys to sort of know that when I say that, we're probably 3 weeks to a month away from sort of having that more formalized to be able to share as information.
Okay, some more information coming. On the transfers, did I hear correctly that the non-urgent transfers are now have the ability to be contracted out?
So we have a contract with Mediviv, Guardian Ambulance Mediviv, that was done through an RFEIOQ. I'll have that acronym wrong off the top of my head. It was a request for information and quotes. It went out. It's slightly different than an RFP where we were able to take that information and then negotiate directly. So it sort of sped that piece up. I don't know how many, I wasn't part of that process and the information, but they did land with Guardian as being successful in that. And so they are able to do sort of those trips with licensed ambulances. We do have the non-ambulance transport algorithm, and that's used by the facilities. And so they have an algorithm and a policy to go through. And if they recognize that the person doesn't need treatment during transport, then they have a number of resources they can reach out to that haven't necessarily gone through that RFP process. And anything from like, we have Claresholm Transportation Society foundations, taxis that have wheelchair accessible vans, and they have an avenue to go directly through them, and it doesn't go through EMS in sort of my department or that piece of it. But and then there is a process for companies or people that have those resources to work with our contract procurement services to actually get their name on the list in order to sort of be on the call list to say, hey, there's a company there that's able to do that service.
So we could encourage a local provider if there was one. I know there is one here that could do that.
Yep.
And help Cochrane
and
response
if you
times.
send me the name, I can send them the contact and the process of how to get registered in that sense.
Okay, that's good to hear. Couple more questions. So you spoke about requiring the physical, well, you have to identify physical capacity, or you have identified that as a constraint, and then capital to backfill, like, and since 2009, when HS took over, like, we had 2 trucks or ambulances at that time. We still have 2. What is the trigger for Cochrane to get a third? And I'll put aside we need more funding and we need space, but say we had that, what is the trigger point?
Yeah, so some of the modeling that we look at, so for example, when I look at the data in Calgary, and I'll start there. So the interesting piece is it looked and it showed 99, if Calgary does 99% of their calls, how much impact is that there? But the answer is actually 99.5. If Calgary does 99.5 or higher, I see a lot less strain on crews that are bordering or circling Calgary. When we look at some of our other modeling, does that mean we can model every community across the province that's going to have 99.5% coverage of their own events based on volume? And so when we look at some of our other events, we look at like modeling of 95 or 90% where they're in community to respond to those number of events. And those are some of the numbers that we sort of started to look at when we look at sort of the modeling piece that starts to create a trigger. And there's 2 things. Does that mean they need another resource? Does that mean we need to look at response plans? Does that mean we need to look at, are they not there because they're covering in a different community and the issue is actually in a different community? So when we look at all of those things and start to understand when a resource needs there, what I can say preliminary is that we know we need to add a resource into Cochrane this fiscal year coming up. That's 10 months away, right? So it's not really that far away from when we think of trying to get the capital dollars, the ambulance, the space to do that. Now, in Cochrane right now, we have 2 trucks 24/7. We do have a physical third truck that's sort of the IFT, that's 16 hours a day, Monday to Friday. So some of the more easy things to implement, right, is to figure out how to add the 8 hours to make it 24 hours, how to add the Saturday and Sunday to that truck. So those are things that we're looking at currently to see, is there a way to do that within the fiscal year? The 4th truck that's parked there sometimes is what we call our spare truck. We only have so many spares in our system, and sometimes it gets moved to Canmore as a spare, it gets moved to Airdrie, depending on where it's needed. It is parked here. We still need a space for spare units. A vehicle doesn't start. What do we do? So we're trying to figure out, my facilities team gets upset. I'm like, well, we'll just get staff and we'll staff the spare. And if it needs to go, it needs to go. They have a spare for a reason to put, to get our vehicles serviced, keep them in service, that part of it. So there is times where we've sort of chosen to sort of staff spare ambulances. They frown upon that versus the ask for new. The challenge and where we got a bit behind on capital, and that is through the COVID and pandemic and funding. And if anybody's bought a vehicle in the last 3 years during COVID, it was a challenge to get that. We saw that at EMS. We used to be able to do an order in the fall, and we could have it by spring, our ambulances. Our order has to be in by June 10th for next year. And those we take 18 to 24 months to come in. So that's the challenge around the capital and the vehicles and getting consistent funding. The government did announce sort of 30 million for funding for EMS earlier on capital and trying to get ambulances. A lot of that is still catch up on replacement that we've deferred. And so we're still sort of catching up and adding new. And that's the piece of, it's a finite resource that we got to look at our highest priority to figure out where to add new. And that's what we're doing right now.
Well, awesome. I think we could help you with the decal. It says Cochrane on the side of one. We had a program where we named our snow plows. Maybe we need to name our ambulance, and then we'll know where they are in the region. So I'm joking, but thank you. Again, I look forward to the next capital funding program to get a third vehicle here, hopefully. Last thing I have to say, I guess, is building on what Councillor Reid was talking about around the MFR program, and I know we utilize the program. Glad to hear. I think we got a bump up in the funding. I'm glad that Ms. Lowe's going to check on that for us. But my question here is like the toll it's taking on, like not just mental toll and financial toll on our taxpayers, but the mental toll on our fire department and the expectations of residents that, and as a first responder, you would know this, that no matter what badge you're wearing, whether it's fire or EMS or whatever, you hear the bell, you're going to go and answer. So there's that, but then the expectation of residents to have trained personnel when they dial 911. So, and I think there's a gap there about what people are perceiving the service to be and what it actually is. So how can we help in this regard? I think we're starting to track our costs and stats on when our fire personnel, our first responders are responding to EMS calls and then waiting for the ambulance to get there to back them up. But in this time when we are backfilling, my personal thought is we should be sending that invoice to the province. I don't for 1 minute think that they're going to pay it, but I do. I'm being, kind of tongue in cheek. Well, how are we going to get any movement here? So if we're, and this kind of dovetails into my last question, is like, so how can we help you advocate for the funding or the leveling up in service that we obviously need in our, not just Cochrane, but across the province? So as municipalities, if we track these things and track the costs and then collectively come together and start to share that with the province, will that be the pressure they need to start to fund adequately to get, in Cochrane, we've grown to 37,000, we have the same ambulance service. So there's a lot in there, but
I'll give you
how can we help?
two answers, the less politically correct one, because that's what I do. I'll say in a previous life, you'd get the answer that says, as a municipality, you guys choose if you respond as MFRs or not. That's not a good answer, right? I get it, right? You guys are there for your community and your members. Really what it is, and what I want to be able to demonstrate is obviously getting my operating plan, my 5-year plan, where we need to add resources, which is sooner than later in Cochrane. That's a need that we need. If we resource correctly, then it's truly that you guys as a fire department and municipality are augmenting the system. So you're not getting there first. You're not waiting 20 minutes. And because a lot of those guys aren't trained or didn't get signed up to do that work, right? And so it puts a lot of strain on them. I recognize that part of it. And so obviously it's a resource issue. It's one thing if it happens once a month versus every day. I think we're getting better at that. We still have a ways to go, obviously, in Cochrane. And I think that's key, is if understanding that we're resourced correctly, here's where we're at with response times, here's where we're at with community coverage. Me being able to get that information to you in the ask and in the plan and in our 5-year plan, that helps you as working with the fire chief around how they want to respond to events. In that bottle of funding that they have now, there is avenues there for us to help them with training and equipment. And if training helps them feel more like, no, we're good to go, but we're just not trained, is there something we can do as AHS to help train people so when they're there and performing skills that they feel comfortable to do that? But really it comes down to EMS being resourced correctly so that you guys are truly augmenting the system and not feeling that you're making up for the system.
Absolutely. So the answer to the last question I had was how can we help? Is it providing clear stats and?
It's I think the two things help in that. And I've said this a couple times, and even my own staff kind of give me a bad time. Like really advocating for us, our modeling tools and how we model and pushing pressure that we've presented. It's been presented to government. I think they've had the information around how we're looking to model, how we're looking to go forward. I'll say 20 years of my life, I've had communities commit to that model or not, because a lot of times then as soon as you commit to the model, it equals $1. Like we hit X, so now you must spend 1.5 million this time, right? And so sometimes there's hesitation to commit to a model, and I don't think the modeling means like, you hit one call above 1,000 means we spent 1.6. Well, what does that mean? We got to start looking at it, and that's where we got to get better at moving up to those triggers and those understandings so that we have commitment to the funding, the capital funding and the space and those pieces. And so really, and I know there's the new provincial committee. I'm not sure the name. It used to be APAC, and I know they're obviously pushing government on those pieces. I don't know the entire representation on that. So I know Chief Peary out of Airdrie is on it, and him and I have had many conversations. But it's really advocating for that part of it, and really the commitment of consistent funding for the capital. We know exactly how many dollars and how many ambulances need to replace. We know how many kilometers we put on them. We know how many they need to be replaced. And we really need the committed capital funding to add the growth and do the replacement for ambulances. And those are probably the two pieces where you guys can help us advocate for consistent capital funding and consistent sort of modeling tool, for example. I look at how we model, and it's probably the best that I've seen in my career around knowing exactly where we need to add ambulances, and it's just a matter of being able to present those and follow through with those pieces.
All right, thank you. I appreciate your answers, and again, appreciate you being here tonight.
All right, thank you very much. Councillor Fedeko, over to you.
Thanks for the information. Again, I do understand you're just the messenger, so don't take some of my maybe statements as too hard to anything that you're particularly doing. I was recently at the Rural Municipality Association meeting, and you know, it's interesting that as a council member, and Councillor Reid brought this up, like the concern of ambulance service, not just here, but across the province, continues to be a hot topic of conversation. It doesn't seem to matter whether you're way up north or you're here. It feels like, you know, there was an election, everybody talked about it, we're gonna get going, and it feels like we just kind of sit there kind of spinning wheels. Kind of like what I said in the last presentation, if we're serious about trying to fix something, let's get going and let's get it fixed. I don't feel like that's necessarily happening. I do appreciate that there are some definite positive changes that have come, but they seem slow, which I'm sure you can probably attest to, that you probably see those slow moving changes as well. When we look at the 90th percentile of response times, and if you look at that graph that you had up there, it was definitely all over the place. And you had mentioned that a lot of that had to do with some staffing challenges and things like that. Is that staffing challenges due to people being sick? Is it staffing challenges due to morale? And what are we going to do to kind of change that, right? Because we can have as many ambulances obviously sitting in the Cochrane Bay as we want, but we need people to actually be able to work the ambulance. So what are we doing to change morale within the actual occupation itself?
Yeah, there's, I could probably talk for an hour on that question on its own. I'll try to give you the Coles Notes version of that. I can tell you it's very clear, Anne, who's my boss, our focus as a leadership team is our people. I can tell you for 13 years, our focus was numbers and the system and, you know, what are patient outcomes and those pieces. Our focus for the last year and continues to be my job, my team's job is to support our staff. If our staff aren't there, they're not going to be there tomorrow. And so even things as simple as breaks, right? You'd sit there and go, we got outstanding calls, like there's no break, you're going on it. We actually are still giving our staff breaks because we could run them hard today and get to that 1 or 2 calls. And if they don't show up now for the next tour, what are we going to do for those 20 or 30 or 40 calls? So we're managing getting our staff breaks as our number one piece. Getting resourced is really my priority when I look at system, because I can tell you I have, you know, quite a few vacancies across that, not too many in Cochrane, but across the zone. And you can sit there and say, well, I want another ambulance. And they're like, well, Tony, you got 20 vacancies. Like, why do we need to give you 4 more positions? I look at it as a bit of a field of dreams. If you build it, they'll come. Like, we need to resource it effectively so that staff actually see that it's resourced effectively so that they come to work, right? We have many staff that are off because they're tired, they've gotten a lot of calls, and then they're sort of burnt out, and we're not resourced correctly. And so we need to make our arguments to be resourced correctly. So it's like, yeah, I have 25 vacancies, I need 30 because I need those 5 positions that I can post and fill so that staff can start to see that we're resourced correctly. You know, when I've talked to staff, when we launched the 45, you know, they've, a couple sort of qualitative answers they give me is like, you know, we're getting out of the hospitals, that's better. And they had a busy Friday night call. And they're like, you know what, we did 10 calls, we canceled on 4 of them, we transported 6, we got out of the hospital. It was busy, but we actually, from a moral distress, they actually felt better about it because that's what they signed up to do. They didn't sign up to sit for 3.5 hours in a hospital waiting room, knowing that their community's not covered. So getting them out of the hospital back in their community is helping us with that. We get some positive feedback to that, but we still got a long ways to go there. We do have a number of supports when we have a psychologist on staff who helps with our programming on mental health, Homewood Health, that they have access to psychological programming, that part of it. We've hired our peer support navigators now, which are full-time versus at one point they were on call off the side of their desk doing it on their days off. So those people are now dedicated for our staff to be able to reach out to. Talking to the gentleman that just got awarded that job a couple weeks ago is really looking at can we use some of our data that we have. We know what type of calls that are sending people off. Can we get more proactive in that versus reactive and having them go off work? Is there a way to say, you know what, you've done 10 significant traumas. We actually need to figure out a break where you don't need to do those calls for a little bit because we recognize what supports you need before they actually hit the call that triggers them to go off. Because a lot of times it's not any specific call versus cumulative number of events that makes people go off. And so those are some of the pieces that team is able to spend focused time and look at. But the short answer is our number one priority is to support our staff. It's challenging because some staff want, it's the variety of supports that some staff may need versus others, and trying to run all of those and understand what it is. We know they need variation options. We've looked at shifting patterns, shorter shifting, longer shifting. We heard loud and clear from our staff through our culture saver, through APAC, that they wanted a bunch of different shifting patterns. In all honesty, we posted some shorter shifting patterns. They are all my vacant lines. People signed up for the 2 days, 2 nights, 12-hour shifts, yet they say they want shorter shifts. But some of that is getting off work on time, all of those things. And so those are the initiatives that we continue to work on to get staff home on time so they're not working overtime and all those pieces. But it's a large bag of initiatives around supporting the staff.
Yeah, and thank you for that. I mean, and I know that change, obviously, a lot of things have been identified, at least over the last couple of years, right? So I know it takes time to kind of, bring people in to implement that change. Are you hoping that next year when you come and do another presentation that 90th percentile starts to look more like the 50th percentile, where it's just much more even keeled, there's no big blips of big shortages? Is that kind of the goal over the next year?
Yeah, I mean, year, yeah. I mean, I'd like it by next week, but in all reality, yeah, the next year, we went from, 39% to 60%, whatever that number is. That's 60 still not where we need to be. It's better. That's the goal, would be to say, you know what, there's an ambulance here 95% of the time, available when a call happens. We'll never meet 100%. You could get 4 back-to-back calls in a half an hour, and all of a sudden, so does that mean we need 5 trucks? Does that mean we need 6 because of the one day? That's the whole piece around what system status management should help us work with, is those one-offs, those peaks. System status management, for example, takes a harsh hit, and it's not system status. It was never intended to manage a system that's resource short, and so the idea of it is really managing peak volumes, big head-ons, number of patients, those kind of things. So that would be, being able to communicate how often an ambulance is here, what our response times are. Driving today, I can't guarantee I have 5 trucks that we could meet response times with traffic circles. I'd love the construction to be done, understand location of ambulance station to response times. Those are some of our challenges in communities, and we need to be able to delve into Cochrane to say, well, we're fully staffed, we should have the number of resources. Are response times getting better? If they're not, is there physical factors that says location? A lot of times, because of planning, our stations sometimes aren't necessarily in the best location. Obviously, we're with the fire hall. Assuming we've done some good planning, it's probably in the best location, but looking forward around, is it the right location? Is there other locations? We can see data where if you add a station, not necessarily another ambulance, you could improve response time. Sometimes it's add an ambulance. So those are all the things that we need to be able to communicate and look at, and have all of those pieces as we move forward.
And I am excited to hear that, there's talk about at least having a peak truck come on at some point. I know the mayor had brought up about the red alerts, and I know that you did say that Calgary and Edmonton, they kind of track theirs. Is there a reason that we can't track ours, or is that, I thought you said something about there was recommendations coming up to be able to track it?
It's
rather than people having to FOIP it, right? Because when they FOIP it, they can find it.
Not really.
So, I mean, or is there some other measure that this can become way more transparent? And because it's not only transparent for us as council members to be able to advocate, hopefully on your behalf, but it's also for the community at large, I think, to have a real good understanding of how many times is there actually an ambulance here in Cochrane? Yeah.
What we really need to be able to do, and I haven't seen it yet, but it got presented to me 2 weeks ago, our modeling tool. That has all the information we need. It's just finding a way for that tool to report out, because then it shows exactly what is happening in a municipality. It's been demonstrated to me. I look at that data and say, that's what most of my municipalities want to know, and I have to find a way to get that information out and available from the modeling tool, because that tells us exactly how often a unit is here, when it's on task, when it's out of service, and if all of them are out of service, it actually tells us if there's another ambulance covering in the community. So it really gives us a full understanding of what's here. What we haven't been able to answer in the past, right, is, I'll use more of an example. If there's a 1-car station and they go out on a call, well, it's in red alert. Now, those are obviously lower call volume stations with 1 truck, but there's times that we've sent a truck there to cover, but we've never been able to communicate that piece, and we actually have the information now. Some of the challenge has been of previous worlds when we've looked at AVL data and the amount of servers to track provincial AVL data to know exactly where each vehicle is located in a geo district, is why we've never been able to hold on to that data source to actually be able to report on every municipality across the province.
And just to kind of follow up what the mayor said, whatever kind of advocacy we can do as council members individually around this table, I mean, that's really where we need to start to try to push on this, because like I said, I mean, standing at another municipality association meeting to hear the same thing that I've heard for the last 4, 6, 8 years. Obviously, we're not doing it fast enough, and we need to push on change and just get it done so that we're not having that continued conversation, 5, 10 years from now still.
And there's two things, right? And I mean this with all sincerity. Our planning, which is close out, making sure you guys have that, making sure Brian and our community action group has, the modeling tool, what our action plan is, what requests we're making, so that, they might, poke holes at the modeling plan and say, hey, this could be different over here, that could be different over here. But at least it's a place to sort of say, here's what we need, here's why. And if we actually had all of that, and now we want to poke holes, it says maybe that should be 95%, not 90, or 100%, not 95. But the key for me is actually having a modeling tool that explains exactly how we want to achieve response times, how we want to achieve community coverage, and then acting on that modeling plan. And we do have a lot of that available to us now. And now it's just working with the town. And the key for me is really, what's Cochrane like in 5 years, and working to say, are you building a new fire station? Are we involved with you guys as a partner to put an ambulance in there? What we've seen in the past is we react to growth, and then by the time we need to build an ambulance station, we're in a industrial area that doesn't help us in response times. Not saying that's the case in Cochrane in that sense, but we definitely have examples of that across the province where we're not in the right location. Because when you look at area structure plans, is there space for a station? All of those kind of pieces. So those are the pieces that we need to work as a partner in a community to address for sure.
Yeah, you brought up some great points about working together, because either we're responding to growth or we're responding to like an actual tragedy that happens, which hopefully I'd rather respond to the growth part than the tragedy part, right? So thank you. I appreciate the information tonight.
Thank you very much. Councillor Flowers, over to you.
Okay, hello. I just have one question. Our local advocacy group tells us that the County of Vulcan a couple years ago developed a partnership or a deal with AHS. I'm wondering if it's something that would benefit Cochrane, and is that correct?
Yeah, it's a bit of unique, and that's really what we think of the political person that says, hey, how do we work local decision in a provincial system? It's an example of being able to do that. So as much as I've heard you guys say, hey, you're the messenger, Tony, no, we can work on initiatives. Really what happened there is working with the fire chief who had PCPs on staff. And really all we did was get them through orientation, bringing them on in our world that they're qualified. And so what happens is, it's happened a few times, we get a sick call on a Friday night and we got one staff member in Vulcan. Meanwhile, they have local people that are PCPs or ACPs on the fire department, and they don't want to work in our system, and have to meet some of our policies and work so many shifts a month and all those pieces. But we've been able to work with them where they're trained and they're ready to go and they're in their community. They don't work outside of their community. They actually have an option to, but they don't work outside of their community. And really all that happens is if we connect with them on a Friday night sick call and they go, yeah, we've got a couple PCPs on staff, they do a call out and they sign up and work with us on the car in the uniform, trained up on the ambulance in that sense. It's worked well. It's still, we keep talking about where it might go and where it can progress to, but it's something that's helped us solve some of those short notice sick calls and coverage in their community for sure.
And PCP stands
Primary care paramedic, sorry, versus advanced care paramedic.
I knew it had something to do with paramedics. Yeah. Well, it sounds like it could be one solution to help with all the issues. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you. It looks like it wraps up our questions. Just for myself, perhaps a little bit of feedback. I mean, I was first elected in 2007, so I was part of the council that, we had our own ambulances here in Cochrane, and we were, forced into the transition, and the promise was, service is not going to decline. And since that time, service has been declining. And I mean, I appreciate your presentation, and I'm glad to hear you're getting better data, you're trying to find a more sophisticated solution to this. I certainly appreciate the outreach pieces on that. But at the end of the day, I think our residents are very clear that we feel we have less service than ever before, and we feel less safe than ever before. And so I certainly hear that, you're trying to make sure that Cochrane can get an ambulance in 10 months, but I mean, we saved 37,000 people today, but I mean, there's no guarantee we're gonna get that. So, I mean, I appreciate your presentation, but for my end, I'm still very much concerned for the service level and safety of my residents. So I appreciate the presentation. Just want to share my perspective on that. And then perhaps a small little feedback to your presentation. Obviously, you're, you know, career public service individual, and very good at making these presentations, and we kind of lean on our planning staff to stop kind of doing this a little bit, but, you know, MFAR, ACP, PCPs, if you want to take advantage of these opportunities, a way to educate the community,
Yep.
it might be an opportunity to maybe adjust the presentation a little bit to kind of speak, you know, people on the street, what that actually means for, you know, how soon they're gonna have to wait, you know, to get an ambulance, that type of a language. I felt I was maybe needing to update my university stats course on some of your stuff. So I know that's the stats and stuff that you're using to report on your models, those type of things, but I think maybe just have a thought to adjusting your public presentations to kind of, to speak to those of us that don't have a background in your field. So that's kind of my feedback on that.
Nope, thank you, appreciate that.
But yes, thank you very much to you and your team. I very much appreciate the public outreach piece.
If I can just add one statement or comment. So June 14th is the unveiling of our fallen paramedic memorial in the legislature. Unfortunately, we have to have one. It's a good sign of the commitment to that. But for those guys that don't know, Mo, who's one of your full-time people in Cochrane, is the chair of the UMass Foundation, so which has been, it's not an AHS initiative for sure, it's a foundation. But she's the chair of that here in Cochrane and has been instrumental with Del Harrison, one of the paramedics who's on that foundation. It's been a 7-year journey for him to do that. So that unveiling is on the legislature on June 14th. It's also going to be streamed live. So if anybody is interested in that piece, it's a pretty awesome recognition of what our frontline paramedics do. So.
Yeah, it's great news to hear about that much needed recognition. Sorry, Councillor Nagel.
Oh, just a follow-up question to clarify. Councillor McFadden, you said that it seems that we're having the worst service ever. But based on the presentation, it looked as though a number of the times had actually come down materially over the last 2 years. So is that a fair characterization that we have the worst service?
I would say in the last year it's better, absolutely. If you look in 2022 on sort of the annual response time for the P90, it was like 26 minutes. The next year was 22. Year to date, like last year was 18. Year to date, we're at 16 minutes and 43 seconds. So definitely better. But I can also say, like, I was talking to our Cochrane Cruise nights tonight. They were days on Friday. I was at the hospital and chatting with them. I just sort of asked them, like, how's the last year, knowing that that's when we launched the 45, and they said it's better. They feel like they're in the community more. Like, so it's my qualitative answer, less versus less data. But they definitely also go, no, we also recognize that they're on a Friday night when it's short-staffed and the hospital's struggling, that we're not there as often. So, qualitatively, they've told me it's better. The data tells me that, but it's also still not where we want it to be. We still have a ways to go in there, and there's still some pieces that we got to work on for sure.
So there's lots of room for improvement, but it has gotten better since the pandemic, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, that's what I saw too.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, sorry, and my point was that from 2007, when we had our own service, we had 100% coverage. We had ambulances in our community all the time looking after our own residents. So that was my context. So, but I appreciate drawing out, there's a lot of sophisticated lenses on this, and I do appreciate that the intent is to, there is that need to create a sophisticated response. And I know if there was a simple answer, it would have been done yesterday, and so there isn't one, so you're working through it.
Nope, thank you, appreciate it.
Yes, thank you very much for your presentation, and well, I'm sure we'll see you again. Thank you very much. So for now, group, I think we'll take a 10-minute break before we move on to our next presentation. So All right, council, I'm calling our meeting back to order to discuss item 4C, the Bragg Creek Trails Association. I'd like to invite Mr. Gordon Salahor to the podium, please. Thank you, sir.
Good evening. I'm Gordon Salahor and representing Bragg Creek Trails, which is a volunteer organization, and it is the steward of the trail network at West Bragg Creek, and it is located on land which is administered by Alberta Forestry and Parks, immediately adjacent to the hamlet just down the road. But the organization's name is Bragg Creek Trails. It's a CRA registered nonprofit. My objective today, I want to make sure that for those of you who may not be familiar, to give a bit of an introduction to what's going on out at West Bragg Creek and the Bragg Creek Trails organization, what's happened over there over the last number of years and the evolution of that asset, and to also hopefully open the door to some further engagement with the town who, along with other regional municipalities, we believe is a user and beneficiary of the asset. Cochrane is immediately adjacent to this world-class four-season outdoor recreation venue. And it is world-class. For people that are into trail recreation, the fact that we have 4 seasons, there's skiing, there's biking, there's hiking, dog walking, and it's very well used. And it's the fact that it is so close to the town of Cochrane, the city of Calgary, it's so accessible, makes it quite remarkable, and it's different a little bit than places like, you know, that we're more familiar with in the mountains that are similar, but the accessibility is certainly something that's very compelling here. Also going to mention a little bit on economic fundamentals. It is public land, and there is no admission, and there are only 3.2 employees. So this is not a big job creator or revenue generator, but it is, there are economic attributes associated with it that have to do with the visitors, and obviously our expenditures and budget. We're not 100% volunteers. We do require some equipment for winter ski trail grooming, and for some full-time staff in some specialized areas. It has been very largely volunteer driven. 10,000 hours a year of volunteer labor goes into it. But right now we're looking at a $1.8 million expansion cost, and we're getting by on a $500,000 annual operating budget. And when you're running snowmobiles and grooming equipment and chainsaws and all that, it's $500,000 doesn't go too far. And I've got some information I'm going to present a little bit on the value for the region, because we do believe there's some economic value as well as quality of life value. And a little bit also on Bragg Creek Trails, the organization itself that oversees the West Bragg Creek network. This organization was incorporated 20 years ago. And so it's been around a long time managing and building this network. And it's happened a little bit under the radar, and it hasn't, it was started by local people, not really with the intent of tourism, or it did not have a high profile, but it's now kind of reached a stage where it slowly over 20 years, it's built itself into a world-class asset. And I'm going to mention and quote some information from Rocky View County Recreation Study. And we know this is a recreation asset. It's a quality of life asset. It's free, public. It's not an essential service. We understand that. But we do definitely, when we look at recreation and what people are involved in recreation, the adjacent county, Rocky View, has done some studies on that, which I'm going to quote for just some context. To describe a little bit the trail network, you can see a map there. Don't need to look at it, but there's 166 kilometers of trails. And the land space it occupies is 14,000 acres. And this, again, is public land, and it's not park. It is within a land use zone of the province administered by Forestry and Parks. Interconnected right in the trail network, there's the Trans-Canada Trail, which some of you may have heard of, and there's some regional specialty networks regarding the sport of mountain biking, and there's two organizations that are immediately adjacent, Moose Mountain and Calgary Mountain Biking, although they manage some trails in the region. It's 4 seasons, multi-activity. So there's, like I've already mentioned, hiking, dog walking, mountain biking, trail running, horse, equine pursuits, cross-country skiing, fat bike, if you've seen those bicycles with the fat tires. People ride those in winter. I don't, but people do, and snowshoeing. And there's 2 major trailheads. Well, the main parking lot, which you see the picture of there, and you see how full it is, has 475 spaces in it. And that's on a winter day, as you can see the snow. So it'll give you some idea of the scale and popularity of the asset. And there's another trailhead down at the south end, which is on the way to the Elbow Falls area on the other highway. It's called Fullerton. It's a 59 parking space access there. The user visits is 300,000 per year, which averages out to 800 user visits per day. By comparison, the Glencoe Museum in Calgary gets 180,000 user visits per year. A little bit of anecdotal information on the value of this free recreation. A couple anecdotes. The table in the upper corner there is a study that was done for Council of Canada, and it has to do with non-motorized recreation. So all the activity at West Bragg Creek is non-motorized. And I've highlighted the ones that look at the incidental spending that is generated on user visits. And in general, you can see these are around, and this is incidental daily spending, so it could be meals, it could be renting a bike, it could be gasoline. It's not necessarily capital purchase, but by the users. So those activities do generate economic benefit. We don't know exactly where that economic benefit occurs. This is anecdotal, sort of using economic metrics. That spending could occur in Bragg Creek. It could occur in the source regions where the users are coming from, or as people are transiting through. But generally, it's based on user visits. So if you average those out, $33 a day on average, 300,000 user visits is $9.9 million a year of economic activity just associated with the visits. That doesn't include any purchases like cross-country skis or bicycles or anything like that. Our belief right now is the current plan we have for expansion and increasing the capacity of the system should increase conservatively 50,000 user visits per year, which is 1.6 million of new incidental spending. Other impact, we believe, again, probably anecdotal a bit, is local real estate. We know that in this world where some of the stats we have on remote work is assets like this are very valuable to people who work at home sometimes, and it affects their choice of where they live. And more and more companies are offering remote days. So living in the country, as you guys know in Cochrane, I'm sure, is affected by the tendency and the ability of people to do remote work. And the last one, probably the most important one, is employment and investment. This is a quality of life asset. It reflects the choices that people make when they want to live somewhere, want to work somewhere, and what companies and companies investing in areas. And you know that there's companies in Cochrane who consider the quality of life when they invest here, and that's a factor. So we think that when you have a world-scale trail network, that's an attribute for quality of life that does pay off in terms of local immigration and investment. And I have some more appendix. I don't want to get into a lot of detail. My presentation is going to be a little bit shorter than the others. What I wanted to really just talk about is our objective, again, for further engagement. Our issue is, again, because we've grown to a large asset, it's happened very quietly. We have an existing funding agreement with Alberta Forestry and Parks, which is the owner of the land. However, we're engaging in an effort right now to also talk to the regional municipalities, who we believe are the primary users and beneficiaries of the asset in terms of quality of life and in terms of trail usage. So this is part of that introduction. As we, in terms of our objectives for funding, we have two problems or two things we're trying to address. One is to get through our current level, our current funding agreement to the next one. We have a bridge period here, and we are availing ourselves of one-time programs grant funding. One we have right now in front of the town of Rocky View County. They have a recreation grant program, which we have an application in front of, and we'll be talking to them in a few weeks. We're making inroads into the city of Calgary. They have not been traditionally a direct supporter of Bragg Creek Trails, but again, we haven't really asked them. So first objective is to avail ourselves of any short-term funding that we can to keep supporting the organization and the asset. And the second objective that we're hoping Cochrane can assist with is for the organization to be introduced and get some profile with the broader user group, which is basically this Calgary Metropolitan Region Board, which there's a member of each of the municipalities sits on. The Mayor of Calgary, Rocky View County, Airdrie, Okotoks are all represented on this. And there is a chapter in the service mandate of the CMRB regarding shared recreation assets. So as you probably know, the CMRB deals with issues of shared assets, primarily things like water and transport, but there is part of their mandate that's involving recreation. For our next round, for our next long-term funding agreement, we will probably need and are going to engage the CMRB in advocacy to the province, but also to themselves as beneficiaries to seek a different level of funding than we've had in the past, given that the asset's now grown and it's got to the point where we now have another 10-year plan in front of the government. There's a lot of expansion and improvement and upgrading that we can do. This is all very modest cost stuff. Our total expansion project is about $1.8 million, be done over a few years. And our annual budget is about $500,000 now, but probably needs to be about $800,000 or $900,000. And we need 1.8 over a number of years and an increase in our annual budget. But having said that, go back to the fact that's in our next funding agreement, which we'll be addressing with the province and the CMRB. So that's what we're hoping, I guess, is that we can get some engagement if there's any opportunities in Cochrane during this bridge period over the next year to get some support for this asset, which we believe your community benefits from. And after that, to help us open doors with the CMRB and the province to get a more permanent funding. We've ended up in this situation, again, because this has grown as really a grassroots, volunteer-driven thing. And it's just reached a point now where the amount of stewardship and to do the job diligently requires a different approach. And that's what we're embarking on.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mr. Teller, for your presentation. Parks and pathways and trails are a passion of mine, so I am really excited to see you here presenting and sharing the story of the Bragg Creek Trails Association. I think you've identified a challenge in that not a lot of folks realize that the amazing trails out at Bragg Creek that they enjoy so much are there because of the hard work of your organization, which has championed the creation and physically built a lot of those trails and works to maintain them year-round. So I think your folks, your volunteer groups, and your small group of staff are kind of some unsung heroes for a lot of our residents that really appreciate having the Bragg Creek Trails Association in our backyards. So, thank you for your work, and I will turn it over for questions from my colleagues. Councillor Reid.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. The reference to the, is a user fee that an individual pay? I'm totally naive about this. I've been there, but I didn't know that I was supposed to pay a fee. So is there a user fee when you arrive there? Or?
No, there isn't. So it's free. It's free public access. The user fees that exist are the Kananaskis Pass that you have to get.
Oh, I see. Okay,
but that's, so we do get some of our funding now that's derived from a very small portion of the Kananaskis Pass revenue. So But yes, there is no user fee, and it doesn't make sense because of the multiple points of access.
Right.
There never will be, I think it's safe to say, because there's numerous parking lots and ways you can sneak in. So our objective is to keep it a free asset.
Yeah, and from my perspective, I would like to learn more about you were talking about $800,000 or $900,000. I'd like to know where your funding's coming from, like how much is the Kananaskis fee you're getting, and so on. But the other question I had around that, well, there's two actually. One is, so there's no way of being able to collect the daily fee, and I get that, multiple points of access. So you really don't know who your users are then? You don't know what percentage of people?
Okay, so there are some of the tracking apps. So people out doing certain activities will track themselves. And one of them is this watch that you're probably familiar with.
Right.
It's called Garmin. That when people that register with the apps that link to the Garmin, sometimes their point of origin can be tracked. So I do have maybe just one little quick thing here. At the bottom, there's some events that have been held there, but at the bottom you can see on the Trail Forks app, we see and again, from the region, it's probably the first two, right, is the one we're talking about. And then there's others from outside the region, or in a lot of cases, people that did not put their point of origin in the app.
So 51%, if I'm reading that right, 51% of the people that you've tracked as users are from the city of Calgary?
This one activity.
Oh, one activity.
This is one activity, so it doesn't.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, it was only for biking and not for the other activities. Right. So it's hard to track, but there's not, generally this is a local asset, and anecdotally we know like 51 out of 60 of the local visitors are probably from Calgary. We get that too. Just by virtue of population, we expect that, each of the municipalities locally participates pro rata according to their population.
Right. And then the Trans-Canada Trail and the other regional networks, do they have, can you access funds through them?
Yes, and we do. And so what we've done so far is the Trans-Canada Trails policy is that they generally fund that precise right-of-way that goes through. So they assisted in funding for that, and to the extent we can apply to them for maintenance, but they're anecdotal. They have a program that goes from every year you apply, and we're running an organization with machinery and stuff. So while we can still avail ourselves and intend to avail ourselves of ad hoc programs and individual donors, we have a large donor base. That's not the foundational funding that we need.
Right, I appreciate that. No, I think you're right on the money. I think it's a fabulous asset sitting in our backyard that more of us would like to, I speak of myself now, would take more advantage of that if it weren't for a working world and those sort of things. I had one kind of side note question, and that is, I noticed that while I was there, do you face a challenge of mixed users, like hikers versus mountain bikers?
It's something that we've been able to deal with, and it's partly delineated by the trails are marked. It's a little bit complex, but it's not a problem. I think the traffic, once you're out there, once you get the people spread out over 100 kilometers, we don't really find that there's a traffic issue, but there are wide trails and there are narrow trails. There are certainly some choke points, and that's part of what our improvement plan is about. So given that we're governed by Alberta Forestry and Parks, we're like other land users. So we're like oil and gas and ranching and logging. We have to make an application to do the development that we want to do. And our plan generally lasts we've got a 10-year plan, which just published in January. So this is hence why the idea that we now have a capital program as opposed to volunteers just randomly cutting trails one at a time. We now have a properly approved program. But having said that, we definitely want to add more options to avoid congestion due to multi-use.
Right. Yeah, and then the last comment is, I really appreciate you being here. I think this is informative, and in particular, I like the regional aspect you have to your presentation. and in particular, reaching out to CMRB, I think that's a natural and appropriate visionary way to be able to move forward. So thank you very much for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Reid. Councillor Flowers, over to you.
Hi. A very impressive number of trails. I had no idea there was that many. I worked with Eric Lloyd on another project, and I knew that there was passionate volunteers and that you guys are good at fundraising, but I had no idea there was that many trails. Just two questions. The sponsorship, have you thought about selling benches or naming the trails after people, or trying to get donations from the large number of Calgary people?
Yeah, so we have a very large donation program which we intend to continue. So our budget is 500,000, and the support that we get from Alberta Forestry and Parks is 300. So we have actually we have mission critical stuff that's not going to get funded unless we reach out to the public. And even that, the 500,000 is now too little. But having said that, we intend to, in addition to a revised funding agreement that reflects the local governments and the province, who's the owner of the land, we do intend to and want to keep a private donor approach going, and we will. So that's definitely part of it. Again, like I said before, the issue with private donors is it's ad hoc and it's not dependable. So we can't do with the trails, we've been able to go, it doesn't matter if you only get half the money, you only cut 100 yards. And then when you get the rest of the money, you cut the next 100 yards. But you can't really engage in a decent capital program with funding like that, especially if it involves any structures that you need advance. You need the money in the bank to commit to the capital. And so far the development's been done in a shoestring kind of hand-to-mouth way, and which donor funding is suitable for that, because you don't know when it's gonna come and how much you're gonna get. So that's still an important element of our funding and also of our engagement with the community, because it is widely used and it is important that people recognize that it's free, even though they're paying for the Kananaskis Pass, but that's something we're definitely going to continue.
Great. Well, hopefully through the marketing campaign, you can increase the revenues. My other question was about the forestry, the logging. I heard something in the news recently about the fear of messing up some of the trails. How do you interface with them?
Yeah, so this is something that's really important to know. We do have statements on our website. You might have to scroll down a bit to get them, but we do have an official statement on logging. The shortest story is this: we are not the public. We are a sanctioned land user, just as West Fraser Timber, Pure Day Oil and Gas. And there is a land users framework for the sanctioned land users in the zone. So our means to address what we are definitely interested in, somewhat concerned by certain elements of what has been proposed for logging. But we have a separate and a private forum to deal with that. So you won't see us on Twitter or something like that saying stuff about logging. As a signatory to that agreement, my view, and I'm not the executive, we have an obligation to work within the framework and be cooperative with the landowners. But by the same token, the other land users have an obligation to not impede each other too excessively. So it's that balance that we're going to seek in our discussion. So, and we talk to West Fraser all the time, but we just can't talk in public about it. And we're not alarmed about, we're not in a panic mode. We're comfortable right now that the West Fraser plans can be, can address our concerns, which we do have some, or can be altered in a way that doesn't, allows a reasonable compromise. So we're satisfied with that.
Good news, and thanks for sharing it with us. I look forward to going out there and checking them out.
Councillor Federico.
Thanks for the information. I like the fact that you brought up about intermunicipal advocacy. I think it's probably the only way to really go forward, especially when it comes to a funding perspective from the government. I mean, I imagine that all of us working together, it just enables that pot of money perhaps to grow rather than for it to be shrunk down and dealing with one community at a time. Have you thought about, I know that you said that user fees, that's, you know, too many different points of entry. Have you thought about a levy? Like, and I know nobody necessarily likes to talk about levies, but if you had a levy, say, on kind of like our housing foundation, right? Like, you know, everybody pays X amount of dollars on a tax bill. Is that something that you've poked around and looked into?
Well, again, because we don't, because there's a number of jurisdictions that benefit, I think the discussion of like us being able to implement, like as a volunteer organization who's simply a land steward on provincially owned land, we don't really even have the means to do that. And there's certain elements of the sponsorships, I believe, like trail, putting brand names on trails and stuff like that. We don't necessarily have the ability to legally do whatever we want on the province's land. So I would say the levy idea for us, because we're 14,000 acres with multiple points of entry and interconnect with the other trail systems, is not something we've really pursued. We do believe that the question as to the balance of funding between the landowner and the benefiting region, that needs to be addressed. And so when I talk about CMRB, I don't know what the outcome ought to be. And maybe perhaps, you know, like other provincial assets, like for example, Canmore Nordic Centre is almost a twin of what we're doing, except we don't have a lodge. You got to put your boots on out in the cold. But if you look at something like that, the province has taken the approach with that they've made it a park, which is not feasible in our case, but they made it a park. 100% of the budget is the province's responsibility, and the employees, some of them, are employees of the province. So that's sort of one outcome. I don't think we're in a position where we can do that. So I think what we're hoping is that the CMRB can either find a way to contribute, as they do with other shared assets, or they can advocate to the province to, I think the province needs a bit of encouragement from the municipalities that benefit to increase our support from where it is. If it was possible or easy for us to just simply make our case to our landowner, the Alberta Forestry and Parks, we probably would be doing that, but we believe we need allies, and we think the CMRB would be a good one. Again, levies, we like the fact that it's free, and we're talking, again, I don't think we're talking, I personally believe when you look at Canmore Nordic, when you look at other quality of life assets that are free or almost free, Glenbow Museum, we're talking orders of magnitude lower funding than any of those places get.
Yeah, fair enough. Are you finding it difficult to kind of just, you know, it's great to hear like how many users are using the trails and all that stuff, but are you finding that information hard to get into the other surrounding communities, even like ours? Like, is there, you know, some sort of wayfinding partnership or something that could happen like from here to there, just to try to spread the word of what is going on?
To tell you the truth, we've just begun this process because, like I said, we've been engaged with Rocky View County because they're immediately adjacent. I've made a number of inroads into the city of Calgary, which have not been productive so far, but definitely they did lead me to the CMRB. But our 10-year plan was just approved in February. And so I think the full digestion of our capital and operating scope is in that document, which wasn't really approved until recently. So I think it's only been a few months that we've had this foundation to say, this is what we're doing, this is what we've been sanctioned to do, and what we're being relied upon to do as a steward of the area, and we need to retool.
Perfect. Well, hopefully even like our tourism group or some of our other, you know, our bike Cochrane groups or you know, some of those groups can obviously reach out, and then hopefully maybe there's some sort of partnership that could come together, and just, even if it's not from a financial lens, but just from an advocacy, you know, try to bolster it as well and get that information out, because that's probably the biggest challenge in some ways.
Well, we've got a lot of users love it. So the people that love that place love it. So we, you know, we have a bike raffle going on with a bike shop in Calgary. There's a cross-country ski club, which has hundreds of members that invited us to speak. So we think there's probably a good awareness, you know, amongst those hardcore users. But I think definitely more outreach and the people that have taken the time to know that, I mean, it's not obvious if you go use the trails, like the first 10 times I used it, I just thought the province funded it. I had no idea that they funded themselves or that the province was only partial funding. So there's a lot more education to do for sure.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions myself, kind of around your funding pieces. So you said you've worked closely with Rocky View County as your closest neighbor. Do they give you an annual contribution to your operational and capital budgets?
No. What Rocky View, no one does except Alberta Forestry and Parks, and their agreements, again, because this is all history, because we started as a grassroots, very low-level requirement organization. We've been able to kind of live hand to mouth. So the history is that only Alberta and Forestry Parks has supported consistently, but even their support is, like I said, in not reflecting the full scale of what we're doing. And it's only, the funding agreements are 2 or 3 years. And again, if you're investing in equipment, we do need some full-time jobs. We only have 3.2. We probably need a couple more. It's hard to hire someone when you're telling them your funding a year and a half from now is unknown. That's a difficult situation to hire into. So, but what we've done with Rocky View is that there's a stretch of land in the town of Bragg Creek that leads into the trails, and the vast majority of their funding has been with respect to that trail between the town site and the parking lot, which we assist in the stewardship of, but it's not part of the Kananaskis land use zone. So up until now, Rocky View County was very specific that their funding didn't cross into the provincial territory. However, with the current application we have in front of them, with the Recreation and Governance Committee, they have a $3 million budget for projects all across the county. One time, not something we can depend on, but for the bridging period that we have for the next year until we get a new funding agreement that involves all the stakeholders, we've got an application in front of them for this bridging period. So there's a mechanism there, and they are aware that we're asking for funding for activity that's not within their county boundaries, and they're still hearing us.
Excellent, that's good
We'll
to
see
hear.
how it goes.
One of the dreams, and I don't know, because I used to be on the Alberta Trails group, right out of my head, so clearly that was a couple years ago. But I know there was some vision at some point of being able to connect, right now there's the vision of being able to connect the Trans-Canada Trail, the Cochrane to Calgary piece. There's kind of that vision, and a key stakeholder group is also advocating the trail connection from Cochrane to Canmore to that trail. But I know as part of the vision at some point, there was a vision of being able to connect Cochrane to the Bragg Creek trail systems. I don't know if that's in anybody's vision or back dreams or where that might be.
It's probably within Trans-Canada Trails. They definitely have that as a long-term view. Our position with Trans-Canada Trails is because we're a network, and you saw that map.
Yeah.
I think what we're a bit different than, say, a single point-to-point pathway, insofar as we're more about trail recreation, and a lot of the trail recreation is running, biking. It's circuit based. So whereas the Trans-Canada Trail it's a linear thing. So our appeal to them is really, we believe that the circuit, our extraordinary circuit, increases the overall visibility and utility of the Trans-Canada Trail. But we don't expect the Trans-Canada Trail goes from point to point, and it's at certain points there'll be these great things called circuits that you encounter on the trail, and I think that's definitely an asset. But I think the point-to-point aspect of it is obviously not within our purview.
Okay, no, fair enough. And just like a last question, like you had indicated, you definitely rely on public donations to fund that gap. So if folks wanted to donate to your worthy cause, they just visit your website. Is that the best way to donate?
Yeah, that's right. And so we do have, again, we have to raise funding every year for operations to put gas in the snowmobile so that we can groom the ski trails and everything else like that. And we also, with this new capital program, we're trying to kickstart some work there. So there's really two funding buckets right now, but it's well publicized again on our newsletters, but we are making some additional outreach in the next month. But again, the user funding is ad hoc, it's not dependable.
Right, for sure. And your website, if we did want to make a donation? If I went home and wanted to contribute with a credit card, what website would I visit?
It'll take you 30 seconds. You press the button, enter your credit card number, you'll get a receipt in a minute.
Excellent. All right, well, thank you very much for your presentation. I think it's an excellent first step in raising awareness of the great work that your organization does.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, group, that brings us on to items 5A, the public engagement policy. I'd like to invite our Manager of Intergovernmental Relations and Corporate Communications, Ms. Kristen Hubrick, to the podium.
Good evening, Deputy Mayor McFadden, Mayor Junungan Council. I'm pleased to be here with you this evening to present the updated draft public engagement policy. Cochrane's public engagement policy was initially adopted in 2006 with revision approvals in 2014 and 2018. Administration has drafted policy update for Council's consideration that reflect a jurisdictional and a legislative scan, as well as feedback collected through the Let's Talk Cochrane public engagement conducted in late 2023, which was presented to Council in mid-May. Based on the policy review and analysis, administration is recommending updates to the policy based on the following criteria: incorporating elements that are relevant and necessary to align with Cochrane's public engagement goals and legislative requirements, using clear and concise language, mitigating risks associated with implementation, and aligning with best practices. The purpose of the policy is to ensure that Cochrane achieves a consistent, coordinated, and outcomes-driven approach to public engagement, facilitates public input into decision-making through effective and efficient processes, and adheres to public engagement requirements in the Municipal Government Act and other applicable legislation. Following the adoption of an updated policy, administration is working on a public engagement framework to define the purpose, methods, responsibilities, and desired outcomes for public engagement in Cochrane. The approved public engagement framework will be used internally to ensure a consistent approach in our administrative to ensure consistency in our administrative approach to public engagement. Administration is seeking Council's feedback on the proposed revisions and updated policy direction.
Excellent. Thank you very much for your presentation. Looks like Councillor Reid is leading us off to questions already.
Updating a policy, updating policy work is tedious at the best. And so I'm uncertain if this is a labor of love or a love of labor, but thank you. I think what I appreciate about the document, not only, excuse me, not only that the document has been updated and made current, but more importantly for me, I like the clear and concise language, and in particular, I like the incorporation of best practices. So I think this is appropriate, and as any organization moves through updating its policies, I like what's been done here. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, over to Mayor Junungan, please.
Yep, thank you. Appreciate the work that's gone into this. I also appreciated the red line version. Very helpful when we're reviewing these things, always flipping back and forth. So appreciate that inclusion. I don't have any issues with the policy. I just have maybe two questions. One is on the very first page, it refers to the policy applying to all Cochrane policies, programs, projects, and by administration or contractors. So is this the same policy that an agency working for the community would have to follow in? Okay, so
Exactly.
all right. So this outlines if somebody's doing a park in our community, and then this is the type of public engagement that we expect them to follow.
Yes, a great example of the transit engagement that's going on right now. So we've got a consultant supporting a lot of that work. This policy would provide the parameters of what our expectations are.
Awesome. Okay, I like that. And then a couple of pages in, and I don't know if it's just a typo, but there's in 3.2 where it says it's struck out the chief and the officer of CAO. Is that supposed to stay, or is that administrative functions and then administration may? Is that, I just didn't understand the language there.
Sorry, Can you repeat it? 3.2, Mayor?
It's
Janelle?
3.2, it's in Cochrane Council May, and then we get into 3.21, 2, and 3, and then there's another 3.2 that says administrative.
Are you looking at the red line version?
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry. And it may just be a typo.
It may just be a typo, and I would go back to the draft version that was attached as well, because it does, it's very clearly defined just in Cochrane Council may and then administration shall.
Okay.
So breaking it down into just the two areas rather than the different levels of administration that were previously identified.
Yeah, and I thank you for pointing that out, because I like this version better. I just found the title, but it could just be the way it translated to the red line version, but the intent is that the administration does this, council does this, and then administration, it's all administration, regardless of level.
Yes,
Perfect. Okay, that was all my questions. Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Flowers.
So, did I understand right that a lot that's been taken out is going to show up in the procedures? This is a policy?
Yeah, yes, I think, well, there's two parts to it. So I think a lot of the pieces that we've taken out that you may have seen are part of what Mayor Janung just referred to, that we used to have a much more detailed breakdown of the different levels of administration, so we pulled that out. There's a lot more conciseness in the language and the content. And then what used to be included was the toolkit at the end, so that is going to be transformed into the framework that will be updated to reflect the policy and brought forward administratively to be used internally.
So the framework is kind of like a procedures.
Exactly.
Is that where we'll see the spectrum of different types of engagement?
The spectrum, yeah, we have removed that from the policy. The spectrum is included in the framework, but again, the framework will be used internally. So it's not coming back to council for formal adoption. It is an administrative document.
I just like this spectrum because it shows the different methods that you can use throughout, but good. Well, thank you for the info.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councillor Fideko.
Thank you. I only have one question. Seeing that this applies to all our policies, as it states here, when it comes to role clarity and it says administration reflects staff and the public reflects the public, I imagine that applies to all of our policies. So there should be very clear distinction that when we're talking about administration, that's not, like, a staff member doesn't become part of the public, right? Administration is administration, public is public. Is that correct?
I may defer to Ms. Lowe on that question.
It would, through the chair, respectfully, it would depend on the policy, and it would depend on the whether or not it's a policy, whether or not it's a bylaw, whether or not it's reflective of legislation. So I think it depends. I think what Ms. Hebrecht is saying is that the parameters of this will apply to all policies. So as we're applying them, the public engagement framework and the strategies and the responsibilities will apply, but it's not necessarily that the definitions within this would supersede any definitions within any other policy, if that's what you're asking.
Interesting. Yeah, I'd just like to, if it's clearly stated it reflects all policies, then I think that's what we should be following. But else it seems a little bit like cherry picking out what works best for which policy. But
I think it would depend, if I could respectfully, my question would be, is there a specific policy you're referring to? And again, this would not apply to bylaws. Bylaws are legislatively adopted.
Excellent, thank you very much. Sorry, it's great to have this update. Public engagement has always been a passion of mine. Of course, we're always evolving and improving, and great strides have been taken this term with our investment and practices in public engagement, which I very much appreciate. So, like having studied the IEP2 framework, which I understand you're taking out and makes sense to me, it's a tool, it probably shouldn't be in policy, it fits in the framework, so I do understand that argument. But one of the pieces I've always wanted us to do, and it probably doesn't fit into your policy question, is that when we are engaging and developing the strategies for how we're engaging with the public to help set those expectations, to clearly identify where on the spectrum that engagement might be. And so, you know, sometimes we're just going to be informing you, sometimes, you know, we're collaborating, or sometimes, you know, the fun ones where we're like naming the street sweepers, we're actually like empowering the public to be part of that. And so I'd really like to see in our communication plans and in where we're communicating to the public that we're identifying what level of the spectrum that we're going to be coming, you know, this piece is to inform you, you know, because we say we're going to engage with you, but that means various different things. And sometimes if you say we're going to engage with you, what people hear is that means, you know, they're going to have, you know, a veto say or some sort of a significant say, but sometimes we can only just inform. So I'd just like to understand if we can build that into the framework, or how we could maybe build that lens into the day-to-day work that we do in our public engagement.
Thank you for the question, Deputy Mayor. So we do currently include that on our Let's Talk Cochrane site for all engagements to identify where the engagement lands within the spectrum. And then as well within the framework, we will identify that as part of the process.
Oh, okay, excellent, good news. Yeah, I do appreciate that you'd identified in here, there's like more red line than anything else I'd like to point out. The different policies. So you'd identified you were gonna lead into the IP2, I think you were leading into the RMA's public engagement spectrum, those type of tools, so I really do appreciate that you identified it. So yeah, I'm looking forward to this coming back, and we can just continue and evolve and improve in this space, so I appreciate that. Any other questions from my colleagues? Seeing none, thank you very much for your time and your report tonight and all your hard work on our behalf. Next up, final item of the night, item 5B, Cochrane Age-Friendly Initiative Update. Ms. Kim Kroc, our manager of FCSS.
Good evening, Deputy Mayor, Mayor, members of Council. I'm here this evening to provide you with an update on the Cochrane Age-Friendly Initiative, and I'm very excited to share the What We Heard report results with you. The timing of this presentation is actually perfect, as today marks the first day of Seniors Week 2024. It has been a while since Age Friendly has come before Council with a formal update, so I thought I'd take a moment just to refresh everyone about the goal of the initiative. Essentially, our goal is to create a community where all individuals, regardless of age, can be meaningful and active participants. And although this project is focused on seniors, it will create ripples throughout the community and have a positive impact on all residents. The quote that we've used to guide our work and efforts is, "If you build for the young, you exclude the old. If you build for the old, you include everyone." It's a really powerful quote, and one example that demonstrates that a little bit is if we build a community that can be easily navigated with a mobility device, we've actually built a community that can be navigated just as easily by a parent with a stroller or a toddler on a Strider bike. The last time a presentation was made, our desire to become an age-friendly community was expressed. The provincial government has laid out 4 steps that must be completed in order to receive recognition. We've worked really hard over the past 2 years and are proud to say that we've just wrapped up step 3 and we're heading into the final phase of developing and implementing an action plan. Throughout 2023 and early 24, we were focused on conducting an assessment of our community to understand what we're doing well, where we can improve, and determine areas of opportunity to become more age-friendly. The assessment examined 8 different domains of community life, providing us with a very holistic approach to assessing the community. Public engagement efforts began in June 2023 with the launch of a survey during Seniors Week. The survey was widely promoted and was available to complete in a variety of formats. Online through the Let's Talk platform, paper copies were distributed throughout the community through our partner organizations. Our team visited many different lodges and worked with older adults to complete the survey with them, and the survey was also printed in the Cochrane Eagle to complete as well. In total, we received 353 responses to the survey between June to August 2023. The results from the survey were analyzed, and we began to delve deeper into public engagement to confirm the results that we saw. With funding from the Calgary Foundation and support from Intelligent Futures, the consultants that guided this phase of public engagement, we connected with residents in a number of ways throughout February to April 2024. 5 workshops were held to engage the public in the conversation. 3 workshops were offered in person, 2 were held virtually, and in total we had 61 participants attend those. We also held targeted focus groups with youth, rural residents, and with service providers to ensure we captured their unique experiences. We also conducted 7 individual interviews to ensure that the data captured all voices. The interviews played a critical role in understanding people's individual stories and their diverse experiences of aging in Cochrane. As you can see, through the survey, workshops, focus groups, and interviews, we were able to reach a wide range of demographics from our community. All of this data has been rolled up into the What We Heard report, which you received in your package. In my presentation, I'm going to touch briefly on each of the domains and the common themes that emerged. Communication and information is an area where there's a big opportunity for improvement. In general, responses were around 60% positive, but we saw that communication and sharing of information spanned across all domains that we ended up looking at. Respondents identified a need to improve our communication. They discussed how communication has become increasingly reliant on social media and online platforms, which is creating a bit of a digital divide. The importance of providing information through a variety of channels, both digital and physical, is important, and a desire to reintroduce alternate communication tactics was a common theme that we heard. The questions around civic participation and volunteerism were very positive, with around 80% agreeing that opportunities exist within our community. Employment fared lower and is an area that has some opportunities for improvement. We heard that residents feel there are ample ways to volunteer and contribute in meaningful ways to the community. However, we did hear that many of our seniors and general population are struggling with affordability and the rising cost of living. We heard about difficulties about being able to retire or the need to return to work post-retirement in order to make ends meet. Finally, we heard that communication about opportunities needs to be improved, that there are opportunities available, but people aren't necessarily aware of them. It was great to see that those who responded to the survey felt a strong level of respect and social inclusion within the community. While there's room for improvement always, this is one of the stronger areas that emerged. In terms of themes for improvement, we heard there's an opportunity to increase efforts around equity, diversity, and inclusion, and provide awareness and education on aging and ageism. Social participation ranked fairly well from respondents. 87% agreed that there are opportunities to be socially active. While there was a high level of satisfaction, there were barriers to participation that were identified. Affordability, transportation, and again, awareness were some of the top themes that emerged. We took a look at a variety of areas in relation to outdoor spaces and buildings. We explored walkability and parks and open spaces. It's apparent that respondents really valued and appreciated our community. And while there are areas for improvement needed, it's important to note that 90% felt safe walking in our community and 92% feel safe in our parks and public spaces. We also looked at buildings and public facilities, and overall feedback was primarily positive. Some of the top themes that emerged from these areas was community connectivity between neighborhoods, between sidewalks and on the pathway system, and we also heard loud and clear that we need more public washrooms and more benches. Transportation emerged as one of the biggest challenges as well for seniors. Respondents made it very clear that it's extremely difficult to age in Cochrane if you don't have a vehicle. We heard a variety of frustrations with the current system and people's ability to access rides. We also heard that transportation options are critical for the health and wellness of seniors, as it is their link to social, recreational, civic, and health services. This area, while it was ranked lower by respondents, is currently under review, and we are encouraging seniors to ensure that their voice is heard in the transportation study that's underway. We heard about this tonight a little bit, but community support and health services also emerged as a higher area of concern as well. Respondents expressed worry about the ability to access services in the community when they need it, as well as the affordability and availability of services to help them remain living independently. Other top themes included experiencing challenges around the complexity of the healthcare system and difficulties with navigation, as well as the need for greater education and awareness of the resources and services that are available. We also heard about from housing earlier this evening, so it's no surprise that this area emerged as an area of concern as well. It's very important to respondents to remain in Cochrane and not have to leave the community. Increasing both the affordability of housing and the diversity of housing was a common theme. Other themes that emerged from the public engagement was the need to increase the support for caregivers. Due to a lack of resources, family members often bear the responsibility to provide the care, which leads to high stress and burnout. There was also a common theme of a desire to increase multi-generational opportunities. Respondents highlighted the incredible outcomes that can result from intergenerational collaboration and expressed a desire for more opportunities to connect. The public engagement process provided a great deal of insight into what we're doing well as a community and some areas that have opportunities for improvement. We will be utilizing the feedback that we received to help inform the development of an action plan. The Age-Friendly Steering Committee, which consists of a diverse group of professionals and seniors that represent all these different domains, will be coming together in June to begin developing a draft plan. The draft plan will then be presented to community leaders for refinement and will be brought back to Council early fall for your feedback and consideration. Before concluding, I would like to acknowledge Sharon Moore, the steering committee and the working groups for the time and passion they've devoted to this initiative, and thank the community members who took the time to contribute their feedback. Thank you for your time this evening, and I now welcome any questions that you may have.
Great. Thank you very much, Ms. Koch. I know this is it's an initiative that I've always been quite intrigued with, and I know it's kind of ever so often we forget about it and then you keep bringing it back, which I really appreciate. So I will now turn the questions over to my colleagues. Councillor Reid.
Thanks, Kim, for the presentation. I really enjoyed the document. I read it thoroughly, actually twice, because it was so informative. I want to begin by expressing my appreciation to you and your colleagues. In fact, at the last council meeting, I had shared that with my council colleagues, that just the great work that you and your team do for our community. It's so commendable. But more importantly, I just wanted to emphasize is just a great return on investment for your organization. Just this report aside, and just this is just another example of the great work that you and your team have done. My question is, given all the thoughtful and appropriate action items, admittedly, some of them are going to be much more expensive than others, including perhaps the need for benches. I'm wondering, will the action plan actually go so far as to identify those in terms of priority? Will there be priority to that? And secondly, I'm assuming that if there are dollar values associated with that they would be identified in the plan so that we could, if appropriate, incorporate them into our budget planning process.
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. Our goal is to complete a plan that is prioritized. We're not looking to create a huge unattainable plan. We're hoping to drill it down to 10 to 15 priority items and have a timeline, short, medium, long-term goals that we can achieve. And within that, we would definitely outline funding potential grants, who's responsible within the plan as well.
Perfect. Thank you. Again, great report.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Councillor Fideko.
Thanks for the information. Just curious, I've been asked to speak with a group of older gentlemen, I guess, and they're quite interested in kind of advocating for a lot of senior, like a senior community, a lot of senior things. Is this something that perhaps they might not be a part of your steering group, but is it something that I could connect them with the steering group to help maybe share some of their ideas of what they're looking at?
Absolutely. I'd be happy to chat with them and understand their needs. In terms of gathering information for the public engagement portion, we've concluded that process, but I am always open to sitting down with our residents and hearing what their needs and ideas are. So
yeah, I think it would just be an interesting connection because they're very interested at kind of starting things, like even doing stuff on their own. They're very dedicated. They want to be involved. but they see a lot of the same challenges that you already brought up with this report, right? Like the aging in place stuff, just like some of our lack of housing for seniors as they get older. And then I guess the only other question that I have is timeline for the action kind of stuff to happen. Obviously, you've got the steering group coming, but what kind of timeline are we looking at? And maybe that goes back to what Councillor Reid said about, if you start to prioritize things, will we start to see some things, click off rather quickly, and other things obviously take longer, depending on if there's a capital cost to it versus, an initiative?
Absolutely. I'm anticipating, we haven't delved into creating the action plan, so it's a difficult question to answer. But I'm anticipating we will have some short-term goals that are easier, less expensive for us to achieve. And then there will be the longer-term goals when we're looking at things like housing and some of those different areas that will probably take us more time to achieve, for sure.
Excellent, thank you. Councillor Flowers.
Thanks for all the great information. There was a lot to digest. And congratulations on the Seniors Week lineup that you've put together for this week. I know that some of it's other organizations, but I know FCSS was very involved, and there's lots to attend to this week. I was also proud to be on the committee and get involved with some of the research and getting seniors out to some of the events. Some things that jumped out at me was a 172% increase in 10 years in seniors in Cochrane. That's a lot. I know people are moving here to be closer to their grandchildren and their children, and also because Cochrane is so beautiful, but we do need to accommodate so many people. And I want to give a shout out to the Calgary Foundation for funding the public engagement part of the plan. I know that Town Council also gave money towards this initiative, but it was great that the Calgary Foundation jumped on board to help out Cochrane. What else? They did mention that they want to see the Red Shell Pass paved, which was interesting. Easier to get around. Oh, and they want the bikes to slow down and use their bells when they're passing. I find that too. They sneak up behind you and it scares you. So just a reminder to everybody to use their bells. One of my favorite comments was that Cochrane is our happy place. That was good to see. What else? Housing, of course, we talked about that. It's a huge issue. I think that was about all that really jumped out at me, but I look forward to hearing about the action plan and seeing where we can make a difference.
Thank you.
Okay. I think that's almost it for questions. I just had one, I guess. If there was like kind of one idea, one concept, one item that you'd like council to take away and think about as we start looking ahead to budget, what might that be related to this, not to the rest of your?
That's a very interesting question and a bit tricky to actually address at this time before we delve into the action plan. I think in terms of council, I would love support to champion the initiative. And once we complete our action plan and have a clear direction of where we're going and what the priorities are, I will be pleased to come back and provide you with an overview at that time.
Yeah, well done.
Thank
well
you.
Done. Anyway, yes, Ms. Cook, thank you very much for your presentation and all the great work that went into providing the age-friendly initiative update. So thank you and have a great night.
Great, thank you.
Excellent. So council, as we've deferred item 5C, as that was the initiative of Councillor Wilson, and he wasn't able to be present tonight, that wraps up our stated agenda. And so I get to say we are adjourned at 8:45. Thank you very much.